Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to lose everything you love in a single moment? Your partner, your children, your parents all gone, leaving you alone in the middle of life's storm. It sounds unbearable, almost too cruel for one human heart to endure. But this is not a story invented to frighten us or a tale crafted for drama. This is the true story of Patacārā, a woman who lived in the time of the Buddha. Her tears once flowed like rivers, her grief shattered her mind, and yet from the depths of that darkness she discovered the light of impermanence, the strength of compassion, and the possibility of healing. You are listening to Buddhism Verity, where timeless stories and profound teachings come alive. The story of Patacārā is not just history, it is a mirror for our own lives. It shows how even in moments of unbearable despair, when everything seems lost, there is still a path to peace, a path the Buddha revealed more than 25 centuries ago. If you have ever carried sorrow in your heart, if you have ever struggled to let go of loss, this story will speak directly to you. Patacāra's story begins not in hardship but in splendor. A life of wealth and confinement is the opening chapter of her journey, for though she was born into luxury, the walls of privilege that surrounded her were also the walls of her cage. In the great city of Savatthi, her parents were among the most respected and wealthy. Their house stood tall and bright, adorned with columns and painted walls, its courtyards shaded by flowering trees. Servants moved quietly through its halls, tending to every need of the family. From the moment of her birth, Patacārā was cherished like a precious jewel. Her parents clothed her in fine garments, draped her in ornaments, and watched over her with protective eyes. To the world outside, her life must have seemed perfect. But for Patacārā herself, perfection came with a heavy cost. Her parents loved her deeply, yet their love was tinged with fear, fear of dishonor, fear of danger, fear of losing control. They resolved to protect her by sheltering her completely from the world. Unlike other children who played in the streets, Patacārā was kept within the mansion walls. Unlike young girls who laughed with friends, she was surrounded only by attendants. Her days were structured, her movements restricted, her choices made for her. It was a childhood of silk and gold, but also of silence and longing. She grew into a young woman whose beauty was spoken of even beyond her household gates. Her skin was like ivory, her eyes bright and alive, her bearing graceful. Her parents knew she would attract many suitors, and they guarded her all the more tightly. They planned carefully for her future, already envisioning the advantageous marriage that would elevate their family's standing even higher. In their eyes, Patacārā was both their beloved daughter and a vessel of prestige. Her heart's desires were never part of the plan, and yet, as in every human story, the heart does not bow easily to the dictates of wealth and social expectation. Within the confines of her mansion, Patacārā's spirit began to hunger for freedom. She heard the laughter of girls her age outside the gates. She glimpsed families walking together in the streets, and she wondered what it would feel like to live an ordinary life. She longed not for more jewels, not for more silks, but for something far simpler: connection, authenticity, love. It was during these restless years that her path intersected with one who would change her life forever. Among the many servants in her household was a young man of humble origin. His tasks were simple: carrying water, preparing meals, mending what was broken. He had no wealth, no status, no name that could bring honor to her family. yet his eyes carried a kindness that lingered. He moved with quiet strength, and when he smiled, it was as though a door opened to a world of warmth beyond the cold calculations of social standing. At first, their encounters were fleeting. A glance across a courtyard, a word exchanged as he passed her a cup, a moment of shared silence in a hallway. But those brief sparks grew into a flame. Slowly, Patacārā felt drawn to him with a force stronger than fear, stronger even than her parents' authority. In his presence, she felt alive in a way she had never known. Their conversations, stolen and whispered, became the highlight of her days. Each word carried weight, each smile was a promise, each touch of the hand, so small yet so daring, was a rebellion against the life that had been scripted for her. As their bond deepened, Patacārā realized that her heart could no longer endure the prison of her parents' mansion. The silks that once seemed soft now felt like chains. The jewels that once glittered now weighed heavy against her skin. Her parents' love, though real, had become a barrier to the life she longed to live. And so, with courage born of desperation and hope, she made a choice that would alter the course of her destiny. One night, when the household slept and the corridors were silent, Patacārā stole away from her chambers. She left behind her silks and jewels, her fine perfumes and gilded mirrors. She carried nothing but her heart and her resolve. With her lover beside her, she slipped into the darkness of the night, leaving the mansion and its protective walls forever. The road ahead was uncertain, but with each step away from her childhood home, she felt lighter. The city lights faded, replaced by the stars of the open sky. Her heart, once stifled, now beat with exhilaration. For the first time in her life, she belonged to herself. No longer a jewel locked in a box, she was a woman making her own choices, even if those choices led to hardship. Together, they built a life in the countryside. Their new home was a hut of mud and wood, simple and fragile. The wind whistled through its cracks, the roof leaked when the rains came, and the earth beneath their feet was bare. Yet to Patacārā, that hut was a palace of freedom. She learned to fetch water from the well, to grind grain, to cook over a fire. Each act of labor was new to her, but instead of resenting the effort, she found pride in it. For once, her hands served not the preservation of appearances, but the nurturing of real life. Her husband, though poor, treated her with tenderness. They laughed together, shared simple meals, and dreamed of the future. The contrast with her parents' home was stark. No glittering ornaments, no servants, no guarded gates. And yet, Patacārā felt richer than she ever had before. The warmth of love filled her days, and the simplicity of her new life gave her a sense of authenticity she had never known. For a time, happiness seemed within reach. But life under the law of impermanence cannot remain unchanged. Joy is always shadowed by uncertainty. The first cracks in her fragile happiness began to show when she discovered she was with child. At first, the news filled her with elation. She imagined herself as a mother, holding a newborn, rocking it to sleep, teaching it to walk. But beneath her joy was fear. She knew the reality of her situation. No family to support her, no midwives to guide her, no luxuries to soften the pain. She was about to enter the greatest trial of her life, without the safety her parents could have given her. And so the stage was set. What had begun as a life of wealth and confinement had transformed into a life of freedom mixed with hardship. Patacārā had chosen love over status, simplicity over luxury, and in that choice she had discovered both joy and vulnerability. She did not yet know how deep her trials would run, nor how heavy her tears would fall. She only knew that her journey as a woman, as a wife, and soon as a mother had truly begun. Patacārā's new life in the countryside unfolded with a rhythm both harsh and beautiful. She no longer woke to the soft rustle of silk curtains or the quiet footsteps of attendants. Instead, the sound of roosters marked her dawn, the crackle of firewood filled her evenings, and the calloused hands of her husband were her only protection against the world. Yet she embraced this life because it was her own. She had chosen love, and with that choice came hardship, but also a freedom she had never known. It was during these humble days that she discovered she was carrying a child. The first trial of motherhood began with joy that glowed like sunlight breaking through clouds. When she first realized her condition, her heart leapt with wonder. She would rest her palm against her growing belly, feeling the faint stirrings of life within her, and her eyes would fill with tears not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Each flutter reminded her that she was no longer only a wife, she was becoming a mother. In quiet moments, she imagined the child's face, the sound of its laughter, the way it might reach out for her hand. At night, lying beside her husband, she whispered her hopes that their child would be strong, that their family, though poor, would be rich in love. He would smile back at her, his rough hands resting gently on her belly, and they would dream together of the future. But as the days turned to months, joy was slowly shadowed by anxiety. Patacārā could not silence the memories of her parents' world. She remembered her mother's chamber, filled with skilled midwives and attendants, women who knew how to ease the pain of childbirth. She remembered the medicines, the soft bedding, the security of wealth. Compared to that, she had nothing. Their hut was bare, their knowledge of childbirth non-existent. Her husband, though kind and devoted, had no power to ease the fear that grew inside her. At times, she spoke of returning to her parents' house, hoping that perhaps the promise of a grandchild would melt their anger. She imagined her mother's arms wrapping around her, forgiveness in her father's eyes, reconciliation made possible by the tiny life she carried. But her husband resisted. His pride would not let him face the scorn of her family. He feared their rejection, feared that they would humiliate him, and refuse even to acknowledge his child. He told her they must remain where they were, that they would manage somehow, and though his words were meant to comfort, they only deepened her unease. The moment of truth came sooner than expected. They were on the road, traveling towards Savatthi, when her labor pains began. The sky stretched endlessly above them, indifferent to human suffering. The earth beneath her seemed both solid and merciless. She doubled over in pain, her cries sharp and raw, and her husband, frantic, searched desperately for shelter. But there was none. No roof, no walls, no bed, only the open wilderness, a place too vast and too empty to offer comfort. The labor was long and grueling. Waves of pain tore through her body, and she clutched at the ground, her nails scraping the soil, as if to anchor herself against the storm. Her husband knelt beside her, helpless, his hands trembling as he tried to soothe her. He had no knowledge, no skill, only love, and love was not enough to lessen the agony. Hours passed, the cries of labor echoing into the night, until at last a new sound broke through the cry of her child. It was small and fragile, yet fierce in its declaration of life. In that moment, The world seemed to change. The pain that had consumed her melted into relief, replaced by awe. She gathered the infant into her arms, pressing its tiny body against her chest. Tears streamed down her face, falling upon the baby's skin, baptizing it in the waters of a mother's love. She whispered words of promise, swearing to protect this life with all her strength. Her husband, wide-eyed with wonder, leaned close to look upon their child. Together they wrapped it in a scrap of cloth, shielding it from the chill of the night. The scene was humble, but to Patacārā it was miraculous. Beneath the open sky, on the bare earth, without midwives or medicines, she had brought life into the world. Exhausted though she was, she felt a new strength awaken inside her, the strength of motherhood, the fierce power that rises from love. As dawn broke, the sun painted the sky in soft hues of gold and rose. The cries of the newborn mingled with the songs of birds, and for a brief moment, all the hardships of their life seemed distant. With weary steps, they began the journey back to their hut, their child nestled in Patacāra's arms. Every movement hurt, but the sound of her baby breathing gave her courage. Back in their home, life settled into a fragile rhythm. Her husband worked in the fields, and she poured herself into the endless tasks of motherhood. She nursed her child, sang lullabies, and watched with delight as the baby's eyes grew brighter, its cries stronger. Each tiny smile was a victory, each giggle a treasure. The simple hut that once felt poor now rang with the music of new life. For a time, happiness seemed possible again. Patacārā cherished every moment, knowing that her child was the fruit of her love, the proof of her courage. She found joy in small things, the way her baby grasped her finger, the warmth of its body against her chest, the quiet peace of watching it sleep. In these moments, she felt richer than she had ever been in her parents' mansion. Yet even in her joy, impermanence lingered at the edges of her awareness. She knew, deep down, that nothing lasted forever. The memory of her lonely labor, the fear of what could go wrong, the knowledge that her family remained estranged, all of it whispered in her heart. She told herself that love would be enough, that if she poured everything into her child, they would survive whatever trials came. But fate, indifferent to human hope, was already preparing its next blow. What she did not know was that her first trial of motherhood was only the beginning. Though she had endured labor on the open road, though she had survived with nothing but her courage and her husband's trembling hands, the greater trials were yet to come. The river of her tears had only just begun to flow, and it would soon rise into a flood. For in a world ruled by impermanence, every joy carries within it the seed of sorrow, and every embrace may one day dissolve into emptiness. After the birth of her first child, Patacāra's life regained a fragile rhythm of peace. The small hut echoed with the cries and laughter of the infant, and though their possessions were meager, her heart felt rich. She thought often of her parents, of the home she had left behind, but she did not regret her choice. She believed that love could shield her from the storms of life. Yet impermanence was always waiting. The husband's fate would come suddenly, without warning, like a shadow that falls across a sunlit path. Time passed, and soon Patacārā was expecting her second child. Her belly grew heavy once more, and with it grew her longing for the comfort of her family home. She remembered vividly the pain of her first labor on the open road, the helplessness of her husband's trembling hands, the raw earth beneath her body as she gave birth beneath the sky. She wanted more than anything to return to Savatthi for the birth of her second child. She hoped that perhaps this time her parents' hearts would soften. Perhaps when they saw her children, their grandchildren, the walls of anger and pride would crumble. Her husband hesitated. The shame of facing her wealthy family weighed on him. He feared their scorn, feared their rejection, feared that they would humiliate him in front of his wife and children. Yet Patacāra's pleas were filled with such urgency that at last he agreed. He could not deny her this hope, even if it meant facing humiliation, and so they set out together. Patacārā, heavy with child, their little boy toddling beside them, and her husband carrying the meager supplies they could gather. The journey was long, and Patacāra's body ached with each step. The heat of the sun pressed upon her, and the weight of her unborn child slowed her down. Yet her spirit was lifted by the thought of her parents, the possibility of forgiveness, the dream of being welcomed home. Her husband walked beside her, silent but attentive, carrying both the burden of their possessions and the unspoken weight of his fear. As the days stretched on, the clouds gathered, the winds shifted, and the sky grew heavy with the promise of rain. One evening, as the first drops began to fall, her labor pains struck suddenly. She doubled over, clutching at her stomach, her cries piercing the air. Panic seized her husband. He knew he had to find shelter, somewhere safe for her to deliver the baby. He set down their belongings and told her to wait. "I will find help," he said, his voice strained. "Stay here. I will return quickly." Patacārā watched him hurry away into the gathering storm. She was left alone with her little boy beside her, the pain of labor twisting through her body, the cries of her unborn child pressing against her ribs. The rain grew heavier, drumming upon the earth, turning the dust to mud. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled across the land. She prayed for her husband's swift return, clinging to the hope that he would bring shelter, comfort, safety. But fate had already decided otherwise. As he searched in the growing darkness, his path crossed with death itself. In the tall grasses, unseen, a venomous snake lay coiled. Startled by his footsteps, it struck with sudden speed, sinking its fangs into his flesh. The venom coursed through his body like fire, and within moments his legs buckled beneath him. His cries were drowned by the thunder. His hands clawed at the earth. His breath came in ragged gasps, and then silence claimed him. The rain washed over his still form, indifferent, relentless. Back where she waited, Patacārā cried out again and again, but no answer came. Hours passed, her labor growing more intense, her fear mounting with every contraction. She clutched her son's hand, whispering promises she could barely keep. At last, with the storm raging overhead, she brought her second child into the world. The baby's cries mixed with the sound of rain, fragile and defiant against the fury of nature. She wrapped the infant in what cloth she had, tears streaming down her face. But when the pain subsided, when the cries of her newborn settled into uneasy breaths, she looked around and realized her husband had not returned. Fear turned to dread, and dread to despair. She waited through the night, hoping, praying, straining to hear his footsteps. But the dawn revealed only emptiness. The space where he should have been remained silent. She knew then, deep in her heart, that he was gone. With both children clutched to her chest, one newborn, one still small, Patacārā wept until her body shook. The man she had loved enough to defy her parents, the one who had shared her simple joys and her struggles, the father of her children, lay lifeless somewhere beyond her reach. The storm had taken him just as surely as it had tested her. She had chosen love, but love could not protect him from death. Her grief was raw, but she had no time to surrender fully to it. 2 children depended on her now, and so she gathered her strength, though her heart was broken. She pressed her newborn against her chest, held her son's hand tightly, and set her eyes once more on the road to Savatthi. Each step was heavy, not only with the weight of her body but with the crushing burden of loss. She walked as if in a dream, her mind numb, her soul torn open. The world around her seemed cruelly indifferent. Birds sang in the trees, flowers swayed in the breeze, the river flowed as it always had. Nature offered no comfort, no pause, no recognition of her suffering. In that contrast, the beauty of the world and the agony of her heart, Patacārā, began to glimpse the truth of impermanence. Everything beautiful, everything cherished, everything beloved, none of it could be held forever. Yet even as grief gnawed at her spirit, a flicker of determination remained. She would reach her parents' home. She would find safety for her children. She would endure. For though she had lost her husband, though her heart was shattered, she could not allow herself to collapse. Not yet. Her children needed her, and so she forced herself onward, step after step, tears mingling with the dust of the road. Patacāra's husband had fallen victim to the cruelty of chance, to the venom of a creature that cared nothing for human love. His death was swift, his absence unbearable, but his fate was not only his own, it was the beginning of a chain of losses that would strip Patacārā of everything she held dear. The wheel of impermanence had only just begun to turn. The darkness had only begun to fall. And though she did not yet know it, the tears she shed for her husband were only the first of many rivers that would flow from her eyes. With her husband gone, Patacārā pressed forward on the road to Savatthi, her newborn cradled against her chest, her older child clutching her hand. The weight of grief was nearly unbearable, but the cries of her children gave her reason to keep walking. She told herself that if she could only reach her parents' home, some measure of safety might be restored. She imagined her father's stern face softening, her mother's arms reaching out to hold her children, the family reunited at last. Those fragile hopes were the only thing holding her together. Yet the road was long, and the forces of impermanence were not finished with her. The children lost to river and sky became the cruelest chapter of her journey, stripping from her what little remained of her fragile world. The rains had been heavy, and as Patacārā neared the city, she found her path blocked by a swollen river. The waters churned violently, dark with mud, swollen with the force of the storm. The sound of the rushing current was deafening, a roar that seemed to mock her desperation. She looked at her 2 children, one so tiny he could not even lift his head, the other small and frightened, clinging tightly to her side, and she realized the impossible task before her. She could not carry them both across at once. Her heart pounded as she weighed her options. To turn back was unthinkable. To remain where she stood was death. The only choice was to cross. She made a plan, as mothers do in impossible circumstances. She would carry her newborn across first, leave the infant safely on the far bank, then return for her older child. She knelt down, holding her son's small shoulders, and told him to wait, to stay where he was until she came back. His eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded. She kissed his forehead, placed the baby carefully in the crook of her arm, and stepped into the river. The current was fierce, pulling at her legs, tugging at her clothes. She clutched the newborn tightly, her body trembling as she fought against the water. Each step felt like a battle, but with determination she reached the opposite shore. She laid the baby gently on the ground, wrapping it as best she could, whispering promises that she would return quickly. Then, with her heart racing, she turned back toward the river to fetch her older child. But in the brief moments she had been gone, fate had struck again. A hawk, circling above, had spotted the newborn lying unattended. To the bird's eyes, it was prey small, helpless, perfect for the taking. With a rush of wings and a piercing cry, the hawk swooped down. Patacārā looked up just in time to see it seize her infant in its talons. Her scream tore through the air, desperate and raw. She flung her arms, shouted, begged the sky for mercy, but the hawk carried her child away, vanishing into the distance. Her body shook with horror, her voice breaking as she wailed. But even in the midst of that unspeakable agony, her mind turned back to her son, waiting on the far side of the river. She stumbled into the water again, driven by desperation. Her cries rang out, frantic and broken, and her little boy, hearing her voice, misunderstood. Believing that his mother was calling him to come, he stepped into the river. The current seized him instantly. His small body was no match for the raging waters. He struggled, arms flailing, but the river pulled him under. By the time Patacārā reached the middle of the stream, she could see only his hand breaking the surface before it. Too disappeared. The water swallowed him, merciless and final. Patacārā collapsed in the river, her cries drowned by the roar of the current. Somehow, through sheer will, she dragged herself to the bank, her body trembling, her breath ragged, but her arms were empty. Her lap was empty. Both of her children were gone, one carried into the sky, the other devoured by the river. She fell to the ground, her face pressed into the mud, her voice hoarse with grief. The world around her carried on, indifferent. The river rushed, the birds sang, the wind stirred the trees. But for her, the world had ended. She had lost her husband, and now her children, the very ones who had given her the strength to continue, had been taken from her in a single, cruel sequence of moments. For a long time she lay there, broken, unable to move. Her mind reeled, unable to comprehend the scale of her loss. She had once been a daughter cherished in luxury, then a wife who chose love over wealth, then a mother who embraced hardship for the sake of her children. And now she was none of these things. She was a widow, childless, alone in a world that had stripped her of everything. The weight of grief pressed upon her so heavily that she could scarcely breathe. Her tears poured freely, mingling with the mud, until it seemed the earth itself drank her sorrow. She could not understand why the world had turned so cruel, why the heavens had shown her no mercy. The pain was so sharp, so unbearable, that her mind teetered on the edge of madness. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the storm of grief, a fragile realization flickered. This was the truth of existence. Nothing, not even the love of a husband, not even the lives of children, could be held forever. All things were subject to change, all joys shadowed by the certainty of loss. Though she could not yet accept it, though her heart screamed against it, the seed of impermanence had been planted in her soul. Still, she rose unsteadily, her body weak, her mind shattered. There was nowhere else to go but forward. Her feet carried her, though she scarcely knew how, toward the city of Savatthi. She walked like a ghost, the memories of her children haunting every step. Their laughter still echoed in her ears, their faces still lingered before her eyes. Each step was agony, but each step was also inevitable. The river had claimed one child, the sky had stolen the other. Her arms, once filled with life, were empty. Her heart, once tethered to hope, was hollow. She was now a woman who had lost everything, a mother whose tears could fill an ocean, a soul adrift in the relentless current of impermanence. And yet, even as despair consumed her, her story was not over. For it was in this very moment of utter desolation, when all seemed lost, that her path would soon intersect with the only presence capable of guiding her beyond the darkness. She walked as if moving through the husk of a dream, the world muffled and far away, the edges of things softened by the blur of grief. The road to Savatthi unfurled beneath her feet without mercy. Her body was weak, her clothing caked with river mud, her hair tangled by wind and rain, but none of that mattered. She had lost her husband to the storm's hidden teeth. She had lost her children to river and sky. Only one thread of resolve remained: reach her parents. If there was any place left that could hold a fragment of safety, it would be home. By the time the city's walls came into view, clouds still hunched low like tired beasts, and the gutters along the road carried a restless ribbon of brown water. She recognized the outline of Savatthi, but felt no relief. People hurried past with baskets and soaked shawls, chattering about the night's violence. Trees split by lightning, roofs carried off, whole courtyards flooded. Their voices came to her as if from the bottom of a well. The collapse of her family home was not yet a fact in her mind, only a possibility crouching in the shadows, unspoken, waiting. She turned down the familiar street of her childhood, where once musicians had played at festivals and fragrance had spilled from the kitchens. Memories rose unbidden, her mother laughing softly, her brother racing her to the gate, her father's sandalwood scent as he returned from business. The stone path she had walked as a girl was now slick with rain, studded with broken tiles. Neighbors stood in small knots, talking in low tones. Some recognized her, or thought they did, then faltered, unsure. She hardly resembled the perfumed daughter they remembered. One woman glanced at her face and pressed a hand to her mouth, as if to stop a question from escaping. "Where?" "My family." Patacāra's voice cracked like a dry reed. "My father, my mother, my brother." The woman looked at her shawl, at the bare feet, at the emptiness of her arms, and then turned her eyes away. Another neighbor stepped forward, hesitated, and lifted a finger to point down the lane. "Your house," he said quietly. "It took the worst of the wind. I am sorry." He did not say more. There was a limit to what language could carry. She hurried, slipping on the wet stones, and then she saw it. A section of wall collapsed outward, columns splintered, beams thrown like matchsticks into the courtyard. The bright painted lintel that once stood proudly above the entry lay split in two. The great house that had sealed her against the world had not withstood the world's turn. Smoke still curled from a smouldering heap where the kitchen roof had fallen and caught. A shattered birdcage lay crushed beneath a timber. The jasmine trellis, which her mother had trained for years, sprawled uprooted, a green tangle dragged into the mud as if by a giant's hand. At first, her mind refused the evidence. She stood in the ruin and tried to stitch the pieces back together with memory. Here was the courtyard where her brother practiced with wooden swords. Here, the alcove where her mother stored winter blankets. There, the inner gallery where her father would pause to untie his sandals. If she could only walk to each place in the right sequence, perhaps the house would rearrange itself. Perhaps her parents would appear from behind a half-standing door with lanterns and a scold. "Late, child, but come in, you are safe now." She called for them, "Mother, Father," and her voice rattled against broken masonry before the rain swallowed it. A city watchman, soaked to the bone, approached with careful steps. "Daughter," he said, choosing the word with tenderness he was not sure he had the right to use. "No one survived here." His mouth tightened, and he gestured toward the road that led beyond the walls. In the night, when the second roof fell, they could not escape. The storm carried the upper rooms. This morning, bodies were taken to the cremation grounds. There is a pyre by the eastern grove. He paused, as if searching for something else to offer her a scrap of comfort, a name, a lie, and finding nothing, he lowered his eyes. She staggered past him, driven by a force that was not thought but reflex, the body's animal insistence on seeing what it fears. The path to the cremation grounds wound through groves of darkened trees. Smoke hung low, clinging to the wet air. When she reached the first pyre, it had already burned low to coals. The attendants were tending a second. The shape upon it was covered in cloth. A glint of gold winked from beneath a fold, her mother's bracelet, the one with the tiny lotus clasp. The sight cleaved her in two. She lunged forward, but someone caught her shoulders with both hands. "Do not," a voice said. "It is not good to pull the cloth." She did not scream. A scream would have named the moment, given it borders. Instead, she made a sound without shape and collapsed to her knees. Time did not pass so much as dissolve. Images came in shards. Her father's sandals by the door, her mother's careful hands shaping dough, her brother's boyish grin as he challenged her to a race. Those pieces no longer fit together. They floated like petals on a flooded pond, circling, separating, colliding, sinking. She poured her body forward onto the wet ground and pressed her forehead into the ash-damp earth until the smell of smoke filled her lungs. The world had taken her husband. The world had taken her children. And now the world had taken the ones who had first called her by her name. Something in her mind, stretched beyond endurance, snapped, not with a dramatic crack, but with a soft, decisive unthreading like a seam giving way. She rose without knowing she had stood. The shawl slipped from her shoulders. The rain licked at her skin. The attendants murmured and averted their eyes. She stepped away from the grove and toward the city, moving without aim, neither slow nor hurried, like a leaf between gusts. If someone tried to tug her clothing back into place, she did not notice. If someone called to her, the words washed over her like more rain. Children, less ruled by propriety than by curiosity, pointed and whispered. A vendor thrust a garment toward her with a scolding shake of the head, then drew it back when she did not respond. A kind woman tried to wrap her in a shawl. Patacārā slipped out of it as if it was smoke. She began to speak to those who were not there. "Little one, do not wade into the river. Wait for me. Brother, you promised to share the mango. Mother, your bracelet is loose. Let me fix the clasp." Sentences tangled, names reversed. She reached up as if to shoo a hawk, then held her arms out as if to catch a child. She laughed once, a bright, terrible sound, and then cried in the same breath, as if laughter and crying were merely two syllables of one word the world could not pronounce. There were people who mocked. There are always such people. But there were also those who watched her with a pain that had nowhere to go. A potter paused at his wheel and bowed his head. A laborer set down his basket and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Loss recognizes loss. Each of them, in some quiet room of the heart, had known a lesser version of what now blazed through her without restraint. They could not lift it from her. They could only witness, which is sometimes the beginning of mercy. Days and nights lost their edges. The city became a vast loop of alleys and courtyards in which she wandered, hair wild, feet bleeding, mind unmoored. In flashes of clarity, she looked up at the sky and asked questions the air could not answer. Why a river to take one child, a bird to take the other? Why a snake for a husband and a storm for a house? Why should love be given if it was only alone? The questions rose and fell like waves, and when they broke, she sank again beneath them. And yet, in the midst of this ruin, something quiet began to turn, so quietly that no one, least of all she, could have named it. In the rubble of certainty, a small space opened where a different kind of seeing might someday stand. The same storm that had broken her had also stripped away the illusions that shelter us from life's plainest fact. All things change. All that we cling to slips from our grasp. It is a truth too heavy to carry in ordinary hours, and so we cover it with errands and appointments and careful plans. She had none of those coverings left. Rumors moved through Savatthi the way wind combs a field. There was a teacher staying at the Jetavana Grove, a man whose presence steadied the heart, whose words were like cool water poured upon flame. People said he spoke not of bargaining with the gods, not of charms and omens, but of seeing clearly of suffering, its causes, and the way beyond. Whether Patacārā heard these words as rumors or as the simple movement of crowds, no one could say. Only this: one morning, as the city shook itself free of night, her feet turned toward the grove without her bidding, guided by a current that did not rush or roar but simply drew her along, the way a river draws a leaf. She passed under the shade of great trees and into a space where many had gathered. The voices softened. A few people made to push her away. Others, seeing the wildness in her eyes, stepped back with pity. She stood at the edge, a figure of ruin, and stared as if she were looking at a fire she did not understand. No one in the crowd yet knew they were living inside a story that would be told for centuries, that a woman whose tears had matched the oceans would soon hear words that recast the ocean as transient rain. This is where Chapter 1 descends into its final hush. The house that kept her safe had fallen. The family that named her had been returned to ash. The mind that held her life together had come undone. And yet, even here, at the precise center of devastation, the conditions for healing were assembling: a grove, a teacher, a teaching born not to deny pain, but to help a human being stand within it and see through it. There is, in this, a quiet instruction for every life. The same world that wounds us also holds the medicine, though we may not recognize the bottle in the dark. Patacārā swayed where she stood, emptied of answers, emptied of even the questions, and the crowd's murmur wove around her like wind through leaves. Somewhere a child laughed, somewhere a cartwheel creaked, somewhere a monk coughed softly into his sleeve. The ordinary world continued, indifferent and intact, and into that ordinariness A voice would soon speak, not to erase her sorrow, but to meet it with a seeing so clear it could hold the whole of her life without collapsing. That voice would begin the turning. But for now, at the end of the first chapter, there is only a woman whose home is gone, whose mind has broken, and whose feet, by some deeper intelligence than thought, have carried her to the place where the path begins. The city of Savatthi hummed with its ordinary rhythm, merchants calling out their wares, children weaving through alleys, the scent of roasted grain drifting from kitchens. Yet within that ordinariness, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Patacārā, stripped of everything, husband, children, parents, even the garments that once wrapped her dignity, wandered the streets like a hollow reed, her hair tangled, her eyes vacant and wild, her words spilling in fragments that stitched together no sense. Some called her cursed, others called her mad, most turned away. Yet her broken steps carried her toward a grove where many had gathered. This was Jetavana, the monastery where the Buddha stayed. The people did not know it yet, but the Madwoman enters the Sangha would become a story told for centuries. She stumbled into the crowd, her body gaunt, her movements erratic, her voice cracked with half-formed sentences. The assembly murmured uneasily. Children pointed, pulling at their mothers' sleeves, while men shook their heads, muttering about omens. Some laughed harshly, dismissing her as a spectacle. Others recoiled, unwilling to look too closely at a pain that mirrored their own hidden fears. For in her they saw the raw image of impermanence, stripped of pretense, stripped of control, stripped of the fragile coverings that protect the heart. The disciples of the Buddha, seeing her disheveled form approaching, moved instinctively to block her path. "Stay back," one of them said, voice sharp with authority. This is not the place for madness. They feared that her presence would disturb the sacred assembly, that her screams and gestures would drown out the voice of their teacher. A few reached to drive her away, but before their hands could touch her, a single glance from the Buddha stilled them. He sat beneath the shade of the trees, serene, unmoving, his eyes resting upon her, not with judgment, but with a tenderness deeper than pity. In his gaze there was recognition not of her as she appeared in that moment, but of the long, unbroken stream of her suffering. He saw the widow clutching 2 children on the road, the mother screaming at the sky as a hawk carried her infant away, the woman collapsing in the mud of her parents' ruined home. He saw all the lives before this one, where she had wept for sons, for daughters, for mothers and fathers, for lovers lost. He saw that her tears, stretched across countless births, were greater than the waters of the 4 oceans. "Let her come," the Buddha said softly. His voice was calm, yet it carried through the grove with unmistakable clarity. The disciples withdrew, uneasy but obedient. The crowd shifted, parting as Patacārā staggered forward, drawn as if by an invisible thread. She reached the open space before the Buddha and fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the earth. Her words poured out in torrents, broken, disordered, almost incomprehensible. The river, the bird, the storm, all gone. My children, my husband, my family. Nothing, nothing remains. Her body rocked. Her head struck the ground again and again, as if seeking to break through the soil to where her loved ones might still be. The crowd grew restless. Some covered their ears, others shook their heads in disgust. Still others whispered, "What can even the Blessed One do for a woman so lost?" But the Buddha did not turn away. He did not flinch at the rawness of her grief. He simply waited, patient as the earth, until her sobs slowed enough for his words to enter. "Patacārā," he said gently, calling her by her true name, though no one had spoken it to him. At the sound, her body stilled. No one had called her by that name since the storm, since the river, since the fire. For a moment, the madness loosened its grip, and she lifted her face to him, eyes wide, tears streaking her dirt-caked skin. "You think your sorrow is greater than any other," the Buddha continued, his voice steady, compassionate, without reproach. "But listen well. The tears you have shed over the loss of loved ones in this life and lives before are more than the waters of all 4 great oceans combined. Each being, wandering through birth and death, has cried as you cry. No one is spared, no one is exempt." The crowd hushed. The breeze itself seemed to still among the branches. Patacārā stared at him, her breathing ragged. Something in his words pierced through the fog of her anguish. She had thought her suffering unique, unbearable beyond measure, a cruelty singled out against her alone. But here was the Buddha, telling her that her tears were part of a river as old as existence itself. She was not singled out, she was not cursed, she was human, and her grief was the grief of all. "You cling to what cannot be clung to," the Buddha said. "Husband, children, parents, none can be kept forever. All things are impermanent. What arises will pass away. This is not punishment, not cruelty, but the nature of all conditioned things. See this truth, and you will see a way beyond your suffering." The words were simple, yet in them was the weight of a mountain and the clarity of a bell. For the first time since her world had shattered, Patacārā felt a shift inside her, not the return of what was lost, but the recognition that loss itself was the rule, not the exception. Her madness had been fueled by resistance, by the refusal of her heart to accept what her eyes had seen. Now, a crack opened in that refusal, and through it slipped a sliver of peace. Her body slumped forward, her forehead pressed to the earth, her tears flowing freely, but no longer with the same frantic despair. These were tears of release, tears that acknowledged the truth rather than fought against it. The crowd, who had moments ago wanted her driven away, now watched in stunned silence. They saw not only a madwoman, but a mirror of themselves, each one carrying loves they could not keep, each one destined to face the same truth. In that moment, Patacārā's madness began to unravel. It did not vanish at once. Pain so deep does not dissolve in an instant. But she had glimpsed a light through the cracks of her brokenness, and she knew, with the certainty that comes not from thought but from recognition, that this man, this teacher, saw her, not her madness, not her ruin, but her true nature waiting beneath it all. The Buddha turned to his disciples and said, "Do you see, monks? This woman has suffered beyond measure, yet her suffering is no different in kind from your own. Let her enter, for in the Dhamma there is room for all who seek release." The assembly bowed their heads, shame and reverence mingling in their hearts. They had wanted to cast her out, to shield themselves from her pain, but the Buddha had embraced her, and in doing so, he embraced them all. And so, amid the murmurs of the crowd, Patacārā was welcomed into the Sangha. Her journey of healing had begun not with the return of what was lost, but with the recognition of impermanence, the first step on the path to liberation. The grove was silent, the crowd hushed by the sight of the madwoman kneeling at the Buddha's feet, her forehead pressed to the earth. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The disciples, who had wanted to cast her out, now watched with widened eyes. The people, who had mocked her, now sat still, hearts trembling with an unfamiliar mixture of pity and awe. Into that silence, the Buddha's voice flowed, calm and resonant, carrying words that would echo through centuries. The Buddha's teaching of tears and oceans was about to be spoken. "Patacārā," he said gently, "you think that your grief is greater than any other, that no one has known sorrow as you have. But this is not so. Listen carefully. Through countless lives you have wandered, searching, clinging, hoping, losing. In each life, you have had parents, children, husbands, wives, friends, and in each life, you have lost them. The tears you have shed in grief for those who are gone are greater than the waters of the 4 great oceans." At these words, the assembly stirred. Some gasped softly, others lowered their eyes, struck by the image. The oceans were vast, unfathomable. To think that a single person could weep more tears than all the seas seemed impossible. But the Buddha's gaze did not waver. His voice carried the certainty of one who had seen the truth directly. "Consider this," he continued. "How many mothers have you lost? How many fathers have you buried? How many brothers and sisters? How many sons and daughters have been carried from you by time? In each life you wept, and in the next life you wept again. If you were to gather all those tears, they would surpass the oceans in their measure. This is the nature of samsara, the endless wandering through birth and death." Patacāra's breath caught in her chest. She remembered the river that had swallowed her son, the hawk that had carried her infant into the sky. She remembered her husband's lifeless body struck down by the snake, the ruins of her family home crushed beneath the storm, and as she listened, she felt those images stretch beyond this single life. The Buddha's words revealed a truth larger than her own story. Her grief, though immense, was not unique. It was shared by all who live and die, by all who love and lose. Her tears had once felt like a river that belonged only to her. Now she saw that it was part of an ocean, a vast tide of sorrow that bound all beings together. She was not alone. She had never been alone. The Buddha's voice was neither harsh nor pitying. It was like cool water poured upon fire, steady and refreshing. "Patacārā," he said, "the tears are endless as long as you wander without understanding. So long as you cling to what is impermanent, so long will you suffer when it slips from your grasp. This is the first noble truth. All conditioned existence is marked by suffering. Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Death is suffering. To part from what is dear is suffering. To be joined with what is not dear is suffering. To desire what cannot be held is suffering." The crowd shifted uneasily, for in his words, each one recognized their own hidden fears. Parents thought of children who would one day leave them. Lovers thought of the fragility of their bonds. Merchants thought of fortunes that could vanish overnight. In each face, the Buddha's words found an echo. "But," he said, his eyes resting upon Patacārā with profound compassion, "there is also a way beyond this ocean of tears. See clearly the nature of things. All that arises will pass away. Nothing you love is truly yours to keep, yet nothing you lose is truly gone, for it too was only a passing formation. When you understand impermanence not with the mind alone but with the heart, then you will loosen your grasp. And when you loosen your grasp, the ocean of tears begins to dry." Patacārā trembled. The words entered her like a seed falling into soil long barren. She had resisted the truth, fought it with every scream, every frantic denial. She had tried to hold her children in her arms against the tide, to call her husband back from death with her cries, to demand her parents' return from the ashes, but now she saw none of it could have been otherwise. The current of impermanence moves through all things, and no one, not even the most powerful, can stop its flow. Her sobs quieted. She sat back on her heels, her body still shaking but her mind opening. "If this is true," she whispered, her voice raw, "then what am I to do? How does one live in a world where everything slips away?" The Buddha's eyes softened. "You live not by clinging, but by seeing. You live not by grasping, but by letting go. When you cease to fight impermanence, when you accept it as the nature of all things, then peace arises. This is the path I teach, the path of mindfulness, of compassion, of wisdom. Walk it, and the ocean of tears will no longer drown you. Walk it, and you will cross to the far shore." The metaphor struck her deeply. She had lost her son to the river, had fought the current with her body and failed. Now she saw that life itself was such a river. To fight against it was to exhaust herself in vain, but to understand its flow, to let go, to step carefully along the path shown by the Buddha, that was a way across, a way to the far shore of peace. Around her the crowd was silent. Many wept quietly, their own losses stirred to the surface. The disciples, who had once tried to push her away, now bowed their heads in respect. For in Patacāra's brokenness, they saw the truth of their own fragility. And Patacārā herself, for the first time since her world had collapsed, felt a glimmer of something other than despair. It was not joy, not yet, but a spaciousness, a release. She realized that her grief, immense as it was, had been fed by the belief that she alone suffered, that she alone had been abandoned by fate. Now she saw that her sorrow was the common inheritance of all beings. In that recognition, her isolation cracked. She was no longer a madwoman cut off from the world. She was a human being among humans, a seeker among seekers. She pressed her palms together, bowing low before the Buddha. Her tears still fell, but they were no longer frantic, no longer wild. They were tears that acknowledged the truth, tears that flowed not from denial, but from acceptance. The Buddha looked upon her and said, "Patacārā, your suffering has brought you here, but suffering need not be the end of the story. If you choose, it can be the beginning. Just as the ocean seems infinite but can be crossed, so too can the cycle of sorrow be ended. With mindfulness, with compassion, with wisdom, the flood can be left behind." In that moment, Patacāra's heart shifted. She could not yet imagine the full path ahead, the long discipline, the steady practice, but she had seen enough to know that healing was possible. She had seen that even her tears that once seemed endless, could one day dry. And so the teaching of tears and oceans, spoken that day in Jetavana Grove, entered not only her heart, but the hearts of all who heard it. It was a reminder that sorrow is vast, but not infinite, that grief is universal, but not final, that even in the flood of impermanence, there is a way to the far shore. Patacārā remained, kneeling in the grove, her palms pressed together, her forehead still damp with tears. The crowd watched in silence, uncertain of what they were witnessing. A woman who only moments before had been the very image of madness was now quiet, her sobs subdued, her gaze steady upon the Buddha. The first glimmer of clarity flickered in her eyes like the faintest dawn breaking after the blackest night. Her mind, though still fragile, had shifted. The Buddha's words about oceans of tears had cracked the shell of her despair. She had thought herself cursed, singled out by fate, but now she understood her sorrow was not hers alone. It was the sorrow of all beings who wander in the endless cycle of birth and death. The recognition did not erase her grief, but it reshaped it. Instead of a prison, it became a doorway. The Buddha, seeing the tremor of awakening within her, spoke again, his voice calm as still water. "Patacārā, your mind has been tossed by grief like a tree in a storm. But even a storm does not last forever. Look closely. Do you see? The clouds gather and the clouds disperse. The river rises and the river falls. The hawk soars and the hawk is gone. Everything arises and everything passes away. Your suffering is great because you believed these things would remain. But when you see clearly that all is impermanent, the heart can begin to rest." She listened, her breath slowing, her body trembling less violently. For so long she had fought against what had happened, insisting with every fiber of her being that it could not be true. She had screamed at the river to return her son, screamed at the sky to release her infant, screamed at the ashes to give back her family. But the river had carried on, the sky had remained silent, the ashes had cooled. Now she saw that her screaming had been a battle against reality itself, a battle she could never win. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, perhaps in months, her mind stilled for a heartbeat. She pictured her children's faces not as torn from her, but as fleeting blossoms. She saw her husband's smile not as something stolen, but as a moment that had shone briefly and then faded, like sunlight slipping across a wall. Her parents, too, she recalled not as victims of cruelty, but as travelers who had simply reached the end of their road before her. It was painful, unbearably so, yet within that pain was a strange softness. It was not resistance, but acceptance. The crowd leaned forward. They could sense something shifting in the air, though they could not name it. Some whispered that the Madwoman was being cured. Others simply wept, recognizing in her face the mirror of their own hidden struggles. For who among them had not lost? Who among them had not clung? In Patacāra's story, they saw the universal story of the human heart. The Buddha continued, "Patacārā, suffering arises from clinging. You held your children as if they were yours forever, but they were not yours. You held your husband, your parents, as if they could remain by your side, but they could not. All things change, all things dissolve. When you cling to them, you suffer. When you let go, you find freedom." His words struck her like a bell. She realized she had been clutching at ghosts, holding tight to what could never be held. The tighter she grasped, the more her heart tore apart. But now, as she loosened that grip even slightly, a space opened inside her. In that space, her breath flowed more easily, her mind felt less suffocated, her body straightened. She lifted her face, streaked with tears, and looked into the Buddha's eyes. For the first time since her life had collapsed, her gaze was clear, steady. "If everything passes," she whispered, "then what is left? If nothing can be held, what remains for us?" The Buddha smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds oceans of compassion. "What remains is the path of seeing clearly, of living with mindfulness, of cultivating compassion. What remains is freedom, not the freedom to hold, but the freedom to release. When you see that all conditioned things are impermanent, you also see that clinging is futile. And in that seeing, the heart discovers peace. Patacārā bowed her head, tears spilling again, but now they were different. They were not wild, desperate tears of denial. They were tears of recognition, of a heart beginning to understand. Her sobs were softer, her breathing steadier. She felt as though a crushing weight had been lifted, not removed entirely, but lessened enough that she could stand beneath it. Around her, the assembly watched in awe. Some began to weep quietly themselves, moved by the depth of the teaching and the sight of a woman transformed before their eyes. They had thought her lost, a madwoman beyond reach. Now they saw that even in the depths of ruin, the Dhamma could take root. In Patacāra's mind, memories still rose, her son swept away by the river, her infant carried into the sky, her husband's body struck by venom, her parents crushed in the storm. But now those images came not with the searing shock of denial, but with the weary acceptance of truth. They were gone, she could not bring them back. And strangely, in that acknowledgement, the fire of her madness cooled. She breathed deeply, the first calm breath she had taken in what felt like an eternity. In that breath she felt a faint glimmer of spaciousness, a tiny clearing in the dense forest of her grief. It was fragile, fleeting, yet real. She clung not to her losses, but to the clarity that they were losses, that nothing more could be done. And in that clarity she found a beginning. The Buddha looked upon her and said, "This is the first step, Patacārā, not the end of sorrow, but the end of blindness. The heart that sees impermanence clearly begins to loosen its chains. Walk this path, and you will discover a peace greater than the sorrow you now bear." She bowed again, her body bending low, her forehead touching the ground. "Blessed One," she whispered, "teach me, guide me. I do not wish to wander any longer in this ocean of tears." And thus, the woman once seen as a mad outcast had become a disciple. The Sangha that had recoiled from her now welcomed her, not because she had been healed entirely, but because she had begun to see. The madness had not vanished in an instant, but the first glimmer of clarity had appeared, and that was enough. For the path does not demand perfection at the start, it only demands the courage to take the first step. The crowd slowly dispersed, their hearts stirred. Some carried with them the memory of the madwoman's cries, others the Buddha's words about oceans of tears, but all carried the sight of a transformation, despair turning toward wisdom, grief bending toward peace. And Patacārā herself, still fragile, still aching, walked away from that grove, not as the broken woman who had entered, but as a seeker with the faint light of clarity in her heart. That light, fragile though it was, would guide her through the long journey ahead. The crowd had slowly dispersed from Jetavana, but Patacārā remained. The tears upon her cheeks had dried into faint lines of salt, her body weary, her heart trembling between despair and a strange, fragile peace. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, her mind was not entirely consumed by madness. There was space now, space created by the Buddha's words, space in which something new could grow. And in that space arose a longing, not for her husband, not for her children, not even for the parents she had lost, but for a way to live that did not end in ruin. She had glimpsed the truth of impermanence. Now she longed to walk deeper into it. This was entering the path of practice. She approached the Buddha once more, her steps tentative, her hands pressed together in reverence. "Blessed One," she said, her voice trembling but steady, "I have lost everything. The world has taken from me husband, children, parents, home. My mind has broken beneath the weight of it. Yet in your words, I have glimpsed something greater than sorrow. Please, let me follow this path. Let me enter your order, so that I may learn to live not with clinging, but with wisdom." The monks stirred uneasily. Some whispered among themselves. She was, after all, a woman who had only recently been raving in the streets. Could such a one truly join the Sangha? Could she truly walk the disciplined path of renunciation? Yet the Buddha, whose gaze pierced beyond appearances, nodded with serene authority. "Patacārā," he said, "your suffering has been great, but your capacity for understanding is greater still. You have seen what many refuse to see. That clinging leads only to pain. This recognition is the seed of liberation. You may enter the path." The monks bowed in silence, accepting his judgment. They brought garments to cover her body, simple robes dyed the color of earth. As she donned them, Patacārā felt a transformation. The silks of her youth had marked her as a daughter of wealth. The rags of her madness had marked her as a woman lost. But these robes, humble, plain, without adornment, marked her as a seeker, one who had stepped beyond the world of possessions. For the first time, her clothing did not imprison her nor expose her. It expressed her choice, her vow to walk a different road. Her hair was shaved, the tangled locks falling away like symbols of her past life. Each strand seemed to carry the weight of old identities: daughter, wife, mother, widow, madwoman. As the last of it fell, she felt lighter, unburdened, though the scars of grief still ached. She was not yet free, but she was on the way. Life in the monastery was unlike anything she had known. The days were simple, governed by the rhythm of alms, rounds, meditation, study, and silence. At dawn, the nuns and monks would walk through the streets of Savatthi with their bowls, receiving food from the lay people. Patacārā, once too proud even to step beyond her family gates, now walked barefoot on the dust of the roads, her eyes lowered, her bowl extended with humility. Some recognized her, whispered her name, pointed and stared, but she did not falter. Each step was a practice. Each grain of rice received a reminder that life was sustained not by possession, but by interdependence. In the afternoons, she sat among the other bhikkhunis, listening to the recitation of the Buddha's teachings. At first, her mind wandered back to her children, her husband, the home she had lost. Memories still pierced her, and sometimes tears welled up unbidden, but the sisters guided her gently. "Watch the breath," they would remind her. "Notice the arising, notice the passing." Slowly, she learned to anchor her mind in the present moment, to see thoughts and memories as passing clouds, not chains binding her to despair. Nights were spent in meditation beneath the trees. The forest was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the call of birds, the hum of insects. In her madness, these sounds had once overwhelmed her, feeding her fear. Now she listened differently. She noticed how each sound arose and vanished, leaving no trace. A bird's call echoed for a moment, then dissolved into silence. A breeze stirred the branches, then grew still. Even her own breath, once unnoticed, now became her teacher, each inhalation arising, each exhalation passing away. Nothing stayed, everything moved, everything changed. There were times when grief surged up like a storm. She would remember the tiny weight of her infant in her arms, the delighted laughter of her little boy, the touch of her husband's hand. Her chest would tighten, her breath catch, tears spill down her cheeks. But now, instead of collapsing beneath the wave, she watched it. She observed how it rose, swelled, and then, like all things, subsided. The memories still hurt, but they no longer shattered her. Each wave left her stronger, teaching her that pain itself was impermanent. The other nuns began to see a change in her. The wildness faded from her eyes, replaced by a calm intensity. Her movements grew steady, her speech measured. She showed remarkable discipline, rising before dawn, practicing with diligence, observing the precepts faithfully. She had been broken, yes, but in her brokenness she carried a determination fiercer than most, for she had seen directly the cost of clinging, and she would not be fooled again. The Buddha himself spoke of her transformation to the Sangha. Monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, he said, do not dismiss those who appear broken, for the Dhamma is like rain that falls upon all fields. Even the barren soil may bring forth flowers if nourished. Patacārā has suffered greatly, but she has turned her suffering into fuel for practice. In this way, she is an example to you all. Hearing this, Patacārā felt no pride, only humility. She bowed deeply, tears of gratitude upon her cheeks. The teacher had given her not only guidance, but dignity. In a world that had mocked her, cast her aside, called her mad, he had seen her worth. That recognition was itself a balm. As weeks turned to months, she felt the first fruits of her practice. Her mind, once a storm, became clearer. She could sit in meditation without drowning in memories. She could walk among others without shame. She could hear the cries of children in the streets without collapsing into sobs. The grief was still there, but it no longer owned her. She was learning to carry it, to hold it gently, to let it teach her. One evening, sitting beneath the great sala trees, she reflected upon her journey. Once, she had been a pampered daughter, locked away in luxury. Then she had been a wife, a mother, a woman clinging to fragile happiness. Then a widow, a grieving mother, a madwoman. Now she was a seeker, a bhikkhuni, in robes the color of earth, walking the path of mindfulness. She saw how each identity had arisen, how each had dissolved. And she realized none of them were truly hers. They were roles, conditions, impermanent forms. The only constant was the awareness that observed them, the clarity that was slowly growing brighter within her. And in that realization, she smiled faintly. It was the first true smile she had worn since the day she had fled her parents' house. A smile, not of denial, not of fleeting joy, but of understanding. She was not yet free, but she was walking the path to freedom. And for the first time, she believed she could reach the far shore. The sun rose gently over Jetavana Grove, spilling soft light across the roofs of the monastery and the shade of tall sala trees. The daily rhythm of the Sangha unfolded with quiet dignity, monks and nuns preparing for alms, novices sweeping the pathways. The sound of chanting carried like a calm river through the air. Within this order, Patacārā found herself not only sheltered, but reshaped. She was no longer the widow whose screams echoed in the streets, nor the madwoman shunned by neighbors. She was now a bhikkhuni, clothed in the simple ochre robe, walking a path defined not by grief, but by discipline. The discipline of the robe became the crucible in which her shattered life was reforged. At first, the robe felt strange upon her skin. It was rough compared to the silks of her childhood and the rags of her madness, but with each passing day, it grew familiar. Its folds reminded her of her vow, to live without adornment, to live without excess, to live without clinging. Each morning, as she draped it across her shoulders, she felt as if she were wrapping herself not only in cloth but in resolve. The robe was no mere garment. It was a reminder, a discipline, a boundary between her and the world of endless desire. Her life was governed by the Vinaya, the code of conduct for monks and nuns. To someone who had once lived in chaos, these rules were not restrictions but lifelines. She learned to eat only what was given in her alms bowl, to be content with whatever food was offered, whether fine or coarse. She learned to speak only when needed, to walk mindfully, to restrain her senses. She learned to rise before dawn, to sit in meditation even when her body cried for rest, to bow with humility before elders. There were moments of struggle. Her old habits clung to her. At times, she remembered the flavors of her mother's kitchen and found the coarse barley in her bowl difficult to swallow. At times, she longed for the comfort of laughter, the easy chatter of family, the warmth of affection. But each time she stumbled, she returned to the robe. She would touch its edge, feel the rough cloth beneath her fingers, and remember, this is the path I chose, the path that will lead me beyond the ocean of tears. The other nuns, seeing her diligence, began to respect her. They had once doubted her ability to live the monastic life, but she proved herself through quiet persistence. She took the hardest chores without complaint, scrubbing the floors, tending the sick, carrying water. She bowed with sincerity, listened with humility, practiced with determination. She did not seek recognition. Her only aim was to walk the path faithfully. Her greatest struggle was with the mind itself. Though the robe had stripped away her outer attachments, memories still rose within her like ghosts. In meditation, she saw again her child swept away by the river, heard again the piercing cry of the hawk, smelled again the smoke of her parents' funeral pyres. The images came unbidden, sharp and merciless. At first, they broke her concentration, plunging her back into despair. But slowly, guided by the teachings, she learned not to fight them. She watched them arise. She named them memory, sorrow, grief, and then she let them dissolve. Each time she practiced this way, their power over her lessened. They were still painful, but they no longer ruled her. There came a day when she sat in meditation beneath a sala tree, and a memory arose of her little boy's laughter. Her heart clenched, but instead of collapsing, she breathed deeply. She saw the sound of his laughter as a phenomenon that had arisen, lasted, and passed. She realized it was no different from the call of a bird in the forest, brief, beautiful, impermanent. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were no longer tears of resistance. They were tears of understanding. The Buddha, hearing of her progress, spoke of her to the assembly. "Monks and nuns," he said, "consider this. Discipline is the ground in which wisdom grows. Without the robe, without the precepts, the mind wanders endlessly, but with them it finds direction. Patacārā, who has suffered greatly, has taken refuge in the discipline of the robe. Through her diligence, she transforms her grief into strength. Learn from her example." His words spread, and people began to speak of her not as the Madwoman, but as the nun of discipline. Lay followers, hearing her story, were moved to offer alms, seeing in her transformation the power of the Dhamma. Some even brought their own grief to her, seeking comfort. And Patacārā, though not yet fully awakened, could speak with compassion. "I too have lost," she would say. "I too have wept until I thought I could not survive. But the Buddha's teaching has shown me that all things pass. Take refuge in mindfulness. Watch your sorrow. It will rise and fall, and in its passing, peace will come." As the months unfolded, her practice deepened. She memorized the verses of the Dhamma, recited them at dawn and dusk. She trained herself to observe every movement, lifting her foot, placing it down, lifting her hand, setting it aside with awareness. She learned to see not only her own impermanence, but the impermanence of all around her, the falling of leaves, the fading of flowers, the shifting of clouds, the wrinkles on a sister's face. Each sight became a sermon, each sound a teaching. In time, the discipline that had at first seemed heavy became her freedom. She no longer needed to wrestle with the chaos of her mind. The structure of practice held her, guided her, steadied her. Within that structure, her grief lost its sharp edges, and wisdom began to take root. One evening, as she folded her robe neatly after a day of practice, she reflected upon her journey. Once, clothing had marked her as a prisoner of wealth, then as a figure of madness. Now the robe marked her as a seeker of truth. It was not a burden but a blessing, not a restraint but a reminder. In its plain folds, she found dignity, strength, and direction. Thus the chapter of Patacāra's madness closed, and the chapter of her discipline began. She was not yet free, but she was walking firmly toward freedom. The tears still came, but they no longer drowned her. They fell gently, like rain upon earth, nourishing the seeds of wisdom within her. And so, under the guidance of the Buddha, the woman once lost to grief and madness entered fully into the path of practice, her life now dedicated to the discipline of the robe. This discipline would prepare her for the deeper insights to come, the moments of realization that would one day make her not only a survivor of sorrow but a teacher of truth, an example for all who suffer in the endless turning of the wheel. The days in Jetavana Grove unfolded like a quiet song, steady and rhythmic, each note shaped by discipline. Yet for Patacārā, it was not enough merely to follow the outer forms of the robe. She had learned to beg for alms, to walk with humility, to obey the precepts. But her mind was still restless, still haunted by memories. To live as a nun was not only to wear robes, but to tame the heart. And so she turned inward, beginning the slow, difficult journey of deepening mindfulness. At dawn, when the first light spilled through the trees, she sat beneath a sala trunk, her robe folded neatly, her hands resting in her lap. The forest stirred with life, the call of birds, the hum of insects, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Once, these sounds would have overwhelmed her. In the chaos of her grief, every sound had pierced her like a spear, but now she was learning to listen differently. She watched each sound arise, linger, and pass away. A bird called, then fell silent. The breeze stirred, then grew still. Nothing stayed. Each sound was a teacher, pointing her back to the truth of impermanence. At first, her mind resisted. When she closed her eyes, visions surged forth: her child's face, her husband's hand, the ruins of her family home. The memories came with such force that her chest tightened, her breath caught. Tears slid down her cheeks, and she wanted to flee. But she remembered the Buddha's words: "Notice the arising, notice the passing." So she sat. She named what arose: memory, pain, grief. She did not push it away, nor did she chase it. She simply watched, and like clouds drifting across the sky, the memories too dissolved. Her breath became her anchor. Inhale, exhale, rising, falling. She noticed the coolness of air entering her nostrils, the warmth as it left. At first, it seemed too small, too ordinary to matter. How could simple breathing heal a heart so shattered? But the more she practiced, the more she saw. Each breath was a perfect mirror of the truth. It arose, it lingered, it passed. She could not hold it, no matter how she tried. And yet, another breath always followed. The rhythm of impermanence was not only in the river or the storm, it was in her very body, here and now. The Sangha sisters guided her gently. When the mind wanders, they told her, bring it back to the breath. When sorrow arises, watch it as you would watch a leaf floating on water. Do not sink with it. Let it drift. She tried, again and again. Some days, her meditation was steady. Other days, it was chaos. There were mornings when her mind screamed against the practice, when she wanted to run into the forest and howl her grief. But each time, she returned to the breath. Inhale, exhale, rising, falling. Slowly, like a pot of water coming to boil, her mind began to soften. She practiced not only in sitting, but in walking. Each step became a lesson. She would lift her foot, place it down, and whisper silently, lifting, placing. The earth pressed against her soul, cool and steady. Step after step, she realized that life was nothing more than this, moment by moment, step by step. She had once tried to control great rivers of destiny, to hold on to family, to fight against storms. Now she saw that all she could ever truly hold was this one breath, this one step, and even that, only for a moment. As mindfulness deepened, she began to notice the subtle shifts in her own heart. Anger arose and passed. Desire arose and passed. Sorrow arose and passed. Each time she saw it clearly, the chain of clinging loosened. She understood now what the Buddha meant when he spoke of the mind as a monkey leaping from branch to branch. Her own mind had once leapt wildly through grief and madness, but now, slowly, it was learning to perch, to pause, to rest. The discipline of mindfulness did not erase her memories, but it changed her relationship to them. She could think of her children without collapsing. She could remember her husband without screaming. The images still came, but they were no longer daggers. They were shadows passing across the ground, and within her, space grew, space for calm, space for clarity, space for compassion. One evening, as she sat in meditation, the memory of her son arose again. She saw him at the river's edge, heard his small voice calling, felt the water surge. For a moment her heart clenched as it always did, but then she breathed, inhale, exhale, rising, falling. She watched the image. She whispered to herself, impermanent, impermanent. And in that moment, something shifted. The image no longer crushed her. It was simply a memory, a formation of the mind, arising and passing. She wept, but not from despair. She wept because she understood. Word of her diligence spread among the Sangha. The monks and nuns spoke of her transformation with quiet respect. This is the same woman who once wandered the streets in madness, they whispered. Now she sits with the steadiness of a mountain. Lay followers, hearing her story, found inspiration. They saw in her the proof that even the deepest wounds could be healed through mindfulness. The Buddha himself, seeing her practice, offered encouragement. "Patacārā," he said, "you have known suffering beyond measure, yet you have turned it into fuel for wisdom. Mindfulness is your path, and through it you will discover freedom. Just as a flood cannot sweep away a tree with deep roots, so too will the storms of grief no longer sweep away a mind that is rooted in awareness." Her heart swelled at these words, not with pride, but with gratitude. For so long she had been tossed by waves, her life shattered by impermanence. Now she was learning not to resist the waves, but to stand firm, to let them rise and fall without drowning. In the quiet hours of the night, she often reflected on the transformation. Once, she had been a daughter trapped in luxury, then a mother trapped in grief, then a madwoman trapped in loss. Now, through mindfulness, she was free, not free from impermanence, but free from the chains of denial. She saw the truth more clearly with each breath, each step, and in that clarity she felt the first true taste of peace. Thus began Patacāra's deepening mindfulness. It was not dramatic, not sudden, but steady, like the slow brightening of dawn. Each day, each practice, each breath, she moved closer to liberation. And though the road was long, she knew she had already crossed the most difficult threshold. She had turned her grief into a teacher, her tears into a path, her losses into lessons of impermanence. The woman who had once screamed at the sky now sat beneath the trees, her breath calm, her heart steady, her mind clear. This was the first step toward mastery of the mind, the foundation upon which her awakening would one day stand. The sala trees stood tall in the evening light, their shadows stretching long across the earth. The monastery grew quiet as the nuns and monks settled into meditation, the low hum of chanting fading into stillness. Patacārā sat among them, her robe wrapped neatly around her shoulders, her body poised yet relaxed. On the surface, she looked calm, but within her heart, waves gathered. For mindfulness was not only about resting in peace, it was also about facing the storms hidden inside. This was confronting the storm within. At first, her mind drifted gently with the breath, inhale, exhale, rising, falling. She followed the rhythm as she had been taught, anchoring herself in the present moment. The sounds of the forest crickets singing, leaves rustling, the distant bark of a dog came and went like passing clouds. Her body grew still, her breath steady. Yet beneath that calm, a deeper current stirred, waiting for its moment to rise. It began with a flicker of memory, the laughter of her little boy, running toward her with open arms. The sound was so vivid she almost turned her head, expecting to see him. But in the space of a breath, the image shifted. He was no longer laughing but crying, water surging around him, his small hands reaching as the river carried him away. Her heart seized. A cry rose to her throat. For a moment, she nearly opened her eyes, ready to flee the meditation as she had fled her grief so many times before. But something within her whispered, "Stay." So she stayed. She sat with the image, trembling, her breath shaky. She watched as the storm broke fully inside her. The river roared in her ears. She heard herself screaming his name, saw the moment his hand disappeared beneath the water. Her body shuddered, her tears spilled freely, but she did not run. She named it silently: grief, memory, pain. She breathed, inhale, exhale, rising, falling. The storm raged on, bringing with it the hawk. She saw her infant lying helpless on the far bank, heard the rush of wings, saw the bird's talons close around the tiny body. Her scream echoed again, tearing through her chest. Her arms lifted involuntarily, as if to snatch the baby back from the sky. But then, again, the whisper, "Stay." She lowered her arms. She breathed. She watched. The image pierced her heart like a spear, yet she remained seated, her awareness steady as a rock battered by waves. Then came her husband. She saw him running through the storm, desperate to find shelter, only to vanish into the grasses where the snake struck. She saw his body convulse, his eyes widen, his breath fade. She remembered how she had waited, heavy with labor, calling for him in vain. The image was unbearable. She felt as though she might faint beneath its weight. Yet again she breathed. Memory, impermanent. The words became her shield, not to block the storm, but to remind her that the storm itself was passing. And finally, the image of her parents. The great house of her childhood crumbling, the walls collapsing, the storm taking everything she had once called home. She saw their bodies on the pyre, her mother's bracelet glinting in the firelight. A sob shook her entire body. This, she thought, was the end of her mind. But no, this was the storm, and she was inside it. The memories came not as gentle ripples, but as a tempest, one wave after another, crashing against her. Yet she did not flee. She faced them, moment by moment, breath by breath. Each time the storm threatened to swallow her, she returned to the anchor of mindfulness, rising, falling, inhale, exhale, and slowly something changed. The images still tore at her heart, but she began to see them differently. She saw the river not as her enemy, but as water obeying its nature. She saw the hawk not as a demon, but as a bird feeding its hunger. She saw the snake not as cruelty, but as a creature following its instinct. Even the storm that toppled her home was not aimed at her. It was simply the sky releasing its burden. The world had not conspired against her. It had simply followed the law of impermanence. This realization did not erase her sorrow, but it softened its edges. She understood now. Her suffering had come not only from loss, but from the belief that loss should not happen, that she was wronged uniquely. In truth, no one escapes impermanence. Everyone loses. Everyone weeps. Her storm was vast, but it was not hers alone. As she sat, the tears still flowing, she began to sense a quiet center within her. The images rose and fell, the grief surged and ebbed, but at the core of her awareness there was a stillness untouched by the storm. It was small, fragile, like the flame of a single lamp in the wind, yet it remained. And in that stillness she felt the first stirring of wisdom, not an idea, not a teaching repeated, but a direct seeing. Everything arises, everything passes. To cling is to suffer. To see clearly is to be free. Her breath deepened. Her body, once tense and shaking, grew calm. She watched the storm begin to subside. The river quieted. The hawk faded into the sky. The snake slithered back into shadow. The ashes cooled into silence. The memories did not vanish, but their power over her lessened. They were like shadows moving across a wall, visible but insubstantial. When at last she opened her eyes, the grove was dark with night. The stars shone through the canopy, their light steady and clear. She felt exhausted, emptied, but also strangely light, as if a burden she had carried for years had shifted from her shoulders. Her grief was not gone, but she was no longer drowning. She had stood in the storm, faced it, and remained. That was victory enough. The next day, as she joined the Sangha for alms, her steps were slower, more deliberate. She noticed each pebble beneath her feet, each sound of the city, each face of the people who stared at her. She carried her bowl not as a beggar but as a practitioner, each grain of rice, a lesson in humility, each act of offering a reminder of interdependence. The storm still echoed in her mind, but she carried it differently. It was no longer an enemy to escape, but a teacher to learn from. In the weeks that followed, she returned again and again to the storm in meditation. Each time, she met it with greater steadiness. Each time, she saw more clearly that the storm was not outside of her, but within her, shaped by clinging and resistance. And each time, the storm lost a little of its power. Thus, in confronting the storm within, Patacārā began to touch the threshold of wisdom. She had not yet crossed fully to the far shore, but she had glimpsed it. She had seen that suffering, though vast, was not endless. She had seen that grief, though fierce, was not final, and she had discovered within herself a stillness that could endure the fiercest winds. The woman once broken by loss was now learning to use her loss as fuel for insight. The mad cries that once tore from her throat had become silent observations of the breath. The tears that once drowned her had become waters of clarity, and the storm that once shattered her mind had become the very ground of her awakening. The nights in Jetavana grew cooler as the season shifted, the wind carrying with it the scent of blossoms. The Sangha continued its steady rhythm, alms at dawn, chanting at dusk, meditation beneath the stars. For most, these were ordinary days. But for Patacārā, something extraordinary was beginning to unfold within her. She had faced her storm, endured its fury without fleeing, and now the storm clouds were thinning. Through the breaks in their darkness, she began to glimpse a sky more vast than she had ever imagined. This was the flowering of insight. One evening, seated beneath the sala trees, she closed her eyes as usual, her hands folded in her lap. She anchored herself to the breath. Inhale, exhale, rising, falling. The memories arose, as they always did: the river, the hawk, the snake, the storm. But this time they did not shake her. They appeared, they lingered, they passed. She observed them with steady awareness, as if watching actors upon a stage. And then, beyond the memories, she began to notice something deeper, the very nature of all things. She saw how every sensation in her body arose and dissolved. The ache in her knees, sharp at first, softened and disappeared. The warmth of the air upon her skin shifted as the night breeze stirred. Even her breath, her most constant companion, appeared and vanished, moment by moment. Each thing whispered the same truth: impermanence. All is changing. She turned her attention to her mind. Thoughts came, scattered and insistent worries, images, fragments of desire. Yet each thought, no matter how urgent, dissolved into silence. They were not solid, not permanent, not hers to command. She realized that her mind, too, was a river, flowing ceaselessly, never the same from one moment to the next. All is unstable. Then she considered her very sense of self. Who was she? A daughter, a wife, a mother, a widow, a nun. Each identity had arisen and dissolved, just as surely as the memories in her mind. None of them had endured. Even the body she now called I was shifting with each breath, aging, decaying, never the same from moment to moment. The idea of a fixed self seemed to crumble beneath her gaze. All is without owner. The insight struck her like a bell. Impermanence, suffering, not self. These were no longer teachings she had heard from the Buddha's lips. They were truths she was seeing directly. Her life, filled with so much loss, had become the very field in which these truths bloomed. Her husband, her children, her parents, she could no longer think of them as hers. They had been with her for a time, and then they had gone, like visitors passing through an inn. Even her own body was only a guest, one day to be returned to the earth. At first, the realization stung. To see that nothing was hers felt like standing on air, without ground to hold her. But as she breathed into it, another feeling arose: lightness. If nothing was hers, then nothing could be taken. If all things were impermanent, then their loss was not cruelty, but nature. She realized that her suffering had come not only from impermanence itself, but from her refusal to accept it. She had clung to her children as if they could remain, to her husband as if he were eternal, to her parents as if they would never die. The clinging had been the chain. The truth was the key. She whispered to herself, her voice trembling with awe, "Nothing is mine, nothing is me, nothing is myself." And in that whisper, she felt a wave of freedom. The forest around her seemed transformed. She opened her eyes and saw the stars shining with a clarity she had never noticed before. Each one was distant, brilliant, impermanent. The trees swayed in the night air, their leaves shimmering, already beginning the slow fall to the earth. Even the sound of a bird's call seemed to carry the truth. It arose, it lingered, it vanished. The whole world was teaching her, every moment a sermon on impermanence, suffering, and not self. She bowed low to the earth, her tears flowing once again. But these were not the frantic tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, tears that watered the roots of her awakening. Her grief had not vanished, but it had been transformed into insight. She had seen with her own heart the truth that the Buddha had spoken: all conditioned things are impermanent, subject to suffering, without self. To see this clearly was to loosen the chains of sorrow. In the days that followed, her practice deepened. She walked with more awareness, noticing how each step began and ended. She ate with mindfulness, observing each taste as it arose and faded. She spoke less, but when she did, her words carried gentleness. The other nuns began to look to her, not as one who was still broken, but as one who carried a special strength. Her pain had become her teacher, and her teacher had become her strength. The Buddha, observing her progress, spoke of her to the assembly. "Monks and nuns, see how the Dhamma transforms suffering into wisdom. This woman has known sorrow greater than the ocean, yet she has turned that sorrow into insight. Just as a lotus rises from the mud unstained, so has Patacārā begun to rise from her grief, unstained by despair. She has seen impermanence. She has touched not self. She has tasted freedom. In her, the Dhamma flowers." The Sangha bowed their heads, moved by the truth of his words. Many lay followers, hearing of her story, found courage in their own losses. They came to her, not to comfort her, but to learn from her. And Patacārā, with humility, shared what she had seen. "Do not think that suffering is only yours," she would tell them. "All beings suffer. Do not think that your grief is unique. The tears of the world are greater than the seas. But when you see impermanence clearly, you are no longer crushed by it. You walk free, even while the world changes around you. Thus, the flowering of insight took root within her. What had once been wounds became windows, opening her to the truth. What had once been tears became streams, nourishing wisdom. And what had once been despair became the soil from which compassion grew. The woman who had once wandered naked and raving through the streets now walked with the dignity of one who had seen deeply. Her eyes, once wild with grief, now shone with clarity. Her voice, once cracked with madness, now carried calm authority. She was not yet fully liberated, but the flower had bloomed, and its fragrance spread quietly through all who encountered her. Patacārā understood now. Her life was not ruined, it was transformed, for in losing everything, she had gained the chance to see the truth that remains when everything else falls away. And in that truth, she found peace deeper than any fleeting joy. The Sangha had watched Patacārā change with astonishment. The woman who once raved through the streets, tearing at her hair, was now steady, dignified, and calm. She had confronted her storm, glimpsed the truths of impermanence and not self, and begun to live with clarity. Yet her journey did not end there. For the Buddha's path was never meant for one person alone. It was a light to be passed on, a medicine to be shared. And so Patacārā began teaching through sorrow, turning the broken pieces of her life into lessons for others. It began quietly. Lay followers who had heard her story came to her with questions. They had seen her in her madness, wailing in the streets, and now they saw her walking serenely among the nuns. "Sister," they asked, "how is it that you, who lost everything, can sit in peace? How is it that your tears have dried, while ours still flow?" Patacārā would sit with them beneath the shade of a tree, her voice low and steady. "I, too, thought my sorrow would destroy me," she would say. "I lost my children, my husband, my parents, my home. I lost my mind. But the Blessed One showed me that all of it, my grief, my madness, even my very sense of self was impermanent. Nothing can be held. Nothing belongs to us. The more we cling, the deeper the pain. When I learned to release my clinging, I discovered peace. You too can find it." Her words carried weight, not because they were eloquent, but because they were lived. When she spoke of loss, she did not speak as one who theorized, but as one who had walked through the fire. When she spoke of impermanence, she spoke not from a scroll, but from the graves of her family. People listened, and their hearts softened. One day, a woman came to the monastery carrying the body of her stillborn child. She wept inconsolably, clutching the tiny bundle against her chest. "Blessed One," she cried to the Buddha, "bring my child back to life." The Buddha, with deep compassion, told her, "Bring me a mustard seed from a household that has never known death, and your child will be restored." The woman went from door to door, but every household had lost someone, parents, siblings, children. At last, she returned, understanding that her suffering was not unique. She laid her child to rest and entered the path of practice. Through it all, Patacārā sat with her, speaking gently. "I too have held the bodies of my children," she said softly. "I too have screamed at the sky. But now I see they were never mine to keep. And though their bodies are gone, their lives still teach me. They taught me impermanence, and impermanence led me here to peace." The woman listened, and though her tears did not stop at once, they fell with less bitterness, more clarity. Soon, many began to seek Patacārā specifically. Mothers who had lost children, wives who had lost husbands, men whose fortunes had crumbled, old people fearing death. Each came with sorrow, and each found in her a mirror. She did not promise them miracles. She did not tell them their grief would vanish overnight. She told them the truth, that loss was part of life, that tears were as ancient as the sea, that peace was possible only through acceptance. Her honesty was a balm. Among the nuns, she became known as one who could comfort the broken-hearted. When novices struggled with memories of their families, when sisters wept for their former lives, it was Patacārā who sat with them, patient and kind. She would guide them through simple practices. Breathe, see the breath rise, see it fall. See how even sorrow rises and falls. Nothing stays. She spoke not as a teacher above them, but as a sister beside them. Her reputation grew beyond Jetavana. Villagers whispered her name with reverence. That nun, they said, the one who lost everything. Her words carry the weight of truth. People invited her to speak, and though she was humble, she did not refuse, for she knew her pain had not been meaningless. It had become her offering to the world. The Buddha himself praised her before the Sangha. Monks and nuns, he said, Patacārā is like a lotus that rises from the mud. Though her life was filled with sorrow, she has turned that sorrow into wisdom. She comforts the grieving, she steadies the fearful, she guides the lost. Learn from her. For one who transforms pain into compassion is a true follower of the path. When she heard this, Patacārā bowed deeply, her forehead touching the earth. Blessed One, she whispered, if I have any strength, it comes only from your teaching. My tears were endless until you showed me they belonged to all beings. My grief was a prison until you taught me to see impermanence. Now, if others find comfort in my story, it is your Dhamma they are hearing, not my words. Yet within her, she knew something had shifted. Once, she had been the one seeking comfort, desperate for a hand to hold. Now she was the one offering her hand to others. Once she had thought her life ruined beyond repair. Now she saw it had become a bridge for others to cross their own rivers of sorrow. In the stillness of her meditation, she reflected, my children, my husband, my parents, they were not lost in vain. Through their passing, I found the Dhamma. Through my tears, others now dry their own. This is their gift to the world, carried through me. And with that reflection, her heart filled not with despair, but with gratitude. The Sangha began to call her a mother not because she bore children, but because she bore compassion. She mothered the grieving, she mothered the frightened, she mothered all who needed to know they were not alone. Her motherhood had been shattered by impermanence, but reborn through wisdom. And so, the woman who once screamed naked in the streets became a healer of sorrow, a teacher of impermanence, a mother of compassion. Her life had been torn apart, but she used the very threads of her suffering to weave a robe of comfort for others. This was the flowering of her second birth, not as a daughter of wealth, not as a wife or mother of children, but as a mother of the Dhamma, nurturing countless beings with the wisdom born of tears. The grove of Jetavana lay bathed in moonlight, the sala trees whispering softly in the night breeze. The monastery was silent. Monks and nuns had retired to their huts, some resting, some deep in meditation. Patacārā sat alone beneath a tree, her robe wrapped neatly, her body still. She had walked far since the days of her madness, and now her steps turned toward the highest peak of practice. This was toward liberation. Her breath rose and fell, calm as the tide. She had practiced mindfulness for months, perhaps years. She no longer counted the days. The memories that once struck her like daggers had become familiar companions, their edges dulled by wisdom. She no longer turned from them, nor did she cling to them. They came, they went, like clouds drifting across a vast sky. But tonight, her meditation cut deeper. She turned her attention not only to memories, but to the very building blocks of experience. She observed sensations in the body: warmth, pressure, tingling, ache. Each one appeared for a moment, shifted, and dissolved. She saw clearly that nothing lasted longer than a breath. She turned to feelings: pleasure, pain, neutrality. Once, these had ruled her life, grasping at what was pleasant, fleeing from what was painful. Now she saw them as they were: fleeting ripples, unable to sustain themselves. Even joy vanished, even sorrow melted. All was impermanent. She turned to the mind itself, thoughts rising like sparks, glowing for an instant, then fading into the dark. Once she had believed her thoughts were her grief, her stories, her judgments. Now she saw them as mere events, passing phenomena without substance. Finally, she turned to the sense of self. Who was she? A daughter of Savatthi, a widow, a madwoman, a nun. Each role had come and gone. The self she clung to was no more lasting than the river she had once screamed against. She saw that the self was a construction, born of clinging, dissolving with awareness. The night deepened, her concentration sharpened, her insight cut like a blade. She saw existence laid bare as a dance of causes and conditions, arising, passing, arising, passing. Nothing stood still, nothing could be owned, nothing was hers. Her heart trembled, but not with fear. It trembled with recognition. This was the truth the Buddha had pointed to all along: impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, not self, anatta. She had heard the words, she had reflected upon them, but now she was seeing them directly, in her own body and mind. A memory flickered the river that took her son. She saw it clearly now, not as cruelty, but as water flowing in accordance with its nature. Another flicker, the hawk carrying her infant. Not malice, but the hunger of a bird. Another, the snake that struck her husband. Not punishment, but instinct. Another, the storm that toppled her home. Not fate, but impermanence. Her grief dissolved into understanding. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of sorrow, they were tears of release. For she saw now that all her life she had been trying to hold what could not be held, and in that futile clinging she had drowned in suffering. Now she was letting go, and in the letting go she was free. Her breath deepened, her mind utterly clear. She felt as though a great weight had fallen away, as though chains she had carried across lifetimes had snapped. Her body grew light, her heart vast. In that stillness, wisdom flowered fully. She saw the cycle of birth and death, the endless wandering fueled by craving and ignorance. She saw how beings clung to pleasure, resisted pain, built identities, and suffered when impermanence tore them apart. She saw that liberation was not in changing the world, but in changing the heart's relation to it. To see clearly, to let go, that was the end of suffering. And then, like a flame blown free of smoke, Her mind became utterly pure. No craving, no clinging, no delusion. The storm within her had gone silent. She had crossed the flood. In that moment, Patacārā attained arahantship, full liberation. The madness was gone, the grief transformed, the chains of samsara broken. She sat beneath the tree, radiant in serenity, her eyes shining with the clarity of one who had reached the far shore. When dawn broke, she rose and joined the Sangha for alms. Her steps were steady, her gaze lowered, her bowl in hand. The people who saw her did not know what had happened in the night, but they felt it. They felt the peace that radiated from her, the dignity that no sorrow could shake. Word spread quickly. Patacārā, once the madwoman of Savatthi, was now an arahant. The Buddha confirmed it before the assembly. Monks and nuns, Patacārā has walked the path fully. From the depths of despair, she has risen to the heights of liberation. Her tears were once as vast as the oceans, but now her heart is an ocean of peace. She is free. The Sangha bowed in reverence, their voices murmuring praise. Lay followers wept with joy, inspired by her transformation. For in her story, they saw proof that no suffering was too great, no wound too deep for the Dhamma to heal. And Patacārā herself, serene and silent, felt no pride, no claim of achievement. She simply knew she was free. Free from the chains of the past, free from the fear of the future, free from the delusion of self. Her life, once shattered, had become whole. Thus ended her long night of sorrow, and thus began her timeless day of liberation. The woman who had once been consumed by madness had become a teacher of freedom, her very presence a testament to the power of the Dhamma. This was Patacāra's triumph, not of wealth or status, but of wisdom, not of clinging, but of release, not of escape from impermanence, but of awakening within it. And so, with her story, she became a beacon for generations to come, proof that the deepest wounds can blossom into the highest wisdom, and that even oceans of tears can give birth to the ocean of peace. The dawn after her awakening was unlike any other. The sala trees shimmered in the early light, and though the world looked the same, the monks on their arms round, the novices sweeping the paths, the crows cawing from the rooftops, Patacārā saw it all with new eyes. The burden of grief had fallen away. She no longer clung to what had been lost, nor feared what was to come. Her heart was still and clear, radiant with the serenity of one who had crossed the flood. Yet liberation was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of another. For the Dhamma is not a treasure to be hoarded, but a lamp to be shared. Thus began Patacārā as teacher of nuns. Word spread quickly that she had attained arahantship. Many who had once whispered about her madness now spoke her name with reverence. The laity came to see her, not out of pity, but to seek guidance. Mothers who had lost children, widows who had lost husbands, daughters grieving for parents, all came with tear-stained faces, hoping she would show them what she had found. Among the Sangha, too, she became a figure of respect. The Buddha himself praised her discipline and clarity, declaring her foremost among the bhikkhunis in mastery of the Vinaya, the monastic code. It was this role as guardian of discipline that made her a true mother of the community, for she knew better than most that structure could save the mind from collapse. She herself had been rescued by the robe, by the precepts, by the steady rhythm of practice. Now she ensured that the younger nuns would not falter. In the quiet halls of the nuns' quarters, she taught with patience, When novices complained of the roughness of the robe, she smiled gently. "I once wore silks finer than any you can imagine," she told them. "But those silks were a prison. These robes, rough as they are freedom. Do not look to the cloth for comfort. Look to the discipline it reminds you of." When others struggled with grief for their families, she spoke softly but firmly. "I buried my parents beneath the storm. I lost my husband to a snake's bite. I saw my children torn from me by sky and river. For years I drowned in sorrow, but the Buddha showed me, all things arise, all things pass. Nothing is truly ours. Do not let your grief consume you, let it teach you. Watch it as you would watch the breath. See its impermanence. In that seeing, you will find peace." Her words were not abstract teachings, they were lived truth. The nuns listened because she spoke not from scrolls but from scars. Patacārā became known not only for her compassion but for her strictness. She upheld the Vinaya with unwavering diligence. "Discipline is the root of freedom," she reminded the Sangha. "Without it, the mind wanders. With it, the mind steadies. Just as a house cannot stand without its foundation, so liberation cannot stand without discipline." Some found her stern, but none doubted her wisdom. She trained the novices with both kindness and firmness, shaping them into practitioners who could withstand the storms of life. Many young women who had joined the order carried wounds like hers. Some had lost children, some had been abandoned by husbands, some had fled homes where they were treated as burdens. They came with sorrow etched deep in their hearts, and in Patacārā they found both mirror and guide. She showed them that suffering did not have to end in madness, that it could become the very path to freedom. There is a story told of a novice who came to her weeping, saying she could not stop thinking of her family. Every night, the novice sobbed, "I see my mother's face, I hear her voice, I miss her so much that I feel I will go mad." Patacārā placed a hand gently upon her shoulder and said, "I too once cried for my mother until I thought my heart would break. But listen, your mother, like mine, is subject to impermanence. She is not gone in cruelty, but in nature. Sit, breathe, see her face arise in your mind, and watch it fade. Each time you do this, her absence will hurt less. Each time, your clinging will loosen. One day, the memory will come like a breeze, and you will smile instead of weep." The novice followed her counsel, and in time, she too found peace. The Buddha himself acknowledged her role. One evening, in the assembly of monks and nuns, he declared, "Of all my female disciples, Patacārā is foremost in discipline. She has mastered the Vinaya, and through it, she guides others with clarity and strength. Follow her example. For one who is disciplined is like a riverbank holding back the flood. Without discipline, the flood destroys. With discipline, the flood becomes a river that nourishes life." These words gave Patacārā no pride, only deeper resolve. She continued to live simply, teaching through her example as much as her words. She accepted little, kept little, and demanded little. But in her presence, others felt steadied, as if standing beside a mountain. In time, the nuns began to look upon her as a true elder, a theri. They turned to her in times of doubt, in moments of weakness. She did not coddle them, nor did she scold unnecessarily. She listened, she guided, she reminded them of the path. Above all, She taught them to see their suffering not as curse but as teacher. Your tears, she would say, are not wasted. They are the water that nourishes wisdom if you let them be. Thus Patacārā, once broken by loss, became a pillar of strength for others. Her life was proof that no suffering was too great to be transformed. She had lost everything, yet through the Dharma she had gained peace unshakable. And now, by her presence and her teaching, she gave that peace to others. The woman once mocked as mad was now revered as a mother of the Sangha, a guardian of discipline, and a teacher whose sorrow had become wisdom. And in her, generations of nuns found both guidance and hope. The monastery thrived with life. Every season brought new women seeking refuge from the world, widows broken by grief, daughters fleeing arranged marriages, mothers tired of endless labor, and maidens simply drawn by the call of the Dhamma. They came with fear, hope, and sorrow carried in equal measure. And standing among them, serene and steady, was Patacārā. She had once been the most broken of all, and now she was entrusted with the task of shaping the Sangha's future. This was guiding the next generation. The Buddha had declared her foremost in discipline, but her greatness did not lie only in rules. It lay in her ability to weave discipline with compassion, to shape novices not through fear, but through wisdom. She knew well that rules without understanding become chains, but discipline embraced with insight becomes freedom. When a new group of novices entered the order, Patacārā would gather them beneath the sala trees. Her voice was calm but commanding, carrying the authority of lived truth. "You have come here seeking peace," she told them. "But peace is not found in comfort. Peace is found in discipline. The robe you wear is not decoration, it is a vow. The bowl you carry is not mere wood, it is a mirror of humility. Every step, every word, every breath is your practice. If you forget this, you will stumble. If you remember it, you will walk free." Many struggled. Some wept at night, longing for their families. Some complained of hunger, of sore feet, of the endless repetition of rules. Some even considered leaving. Patacārā met each with patience. She did not scold harshly, for she knew what it was to collapse beneath grief. Instead, she guided them, drawing upon her own story. "Do you think your sorrow is too heavy?" she asked one novice who wept for her lost child. "I once buried 2 sons, saw them taken by sky and river in the same day. I screamed until my mind broke. But even that storm became my teacher. Do not think your grief is unique. It is the same grief all beings carry. Watch it, learn from it, and you will find freedom." Another novice balked at the simplicity of monastic life, complaining of coarse food and rough robes. Patacārā smiled gently. "Once I lived in a mansion, clothed in silks, eating the finest dishes. Yet I was a prisoner. My heart was restless, chained by desire. Now I eat what is given, wear what is simple, and my heart is free. Do not mistake comfort for freedom." In this way, she became not only a disciplinarian but a mother, nurturing and shaping the minds of her younger sisters. She taught them to meditate patiently, guiding them when their thoughts ran wild. She taught them to recite the Dhamma, ensuring the words sank not only into memory but into the marrow of their being. She walked with them on alms rounds, showing them how to meet the gaze of the lay people with humility, not pride. She reminded them always, every gesture, every action is training. If you waste a single moment, you waste a chance to awaken. The Sangha soon began to flourish under her care. The young nuns she trained grew strong in discipline, steady in practice, gentle in compassion. Many of them attained deep insight themselves. Some became teachers, others healers of the grieving, still others silent practitioners whose presence alone calmed hearts. And all of them carried within them the imprint of Patacāra's guidance. Her legacy deepened when the Buddha encouraged her to lead recitations of the Vinaya for the women. She memorized the rules with flawless precision and taught them with clarity. But more than recitation, she explained their spirit. "Why do we rise before dawn?" she asked. "Not because the rule demands it, but because dawn is the hour of clarity. Why do we eat only once a day? Not to punish ourselves, but to remind the body that it is not our master. Each rule is a tool, each precept a lamp. See them not as chains, but as guides." In time, her reputation spread across the land. Women from distant villages came to join the order simply because they had heard of Patacārā. They knew her as the nun who had lost everything, the one who had gone mad with grief, yet emerged free. To learn from her was to learn not only discipline, but resilience. There is a story told of a young woman who arrived at Jetavana after losing her entire family to a plague. She was consumed by despair, refusing food, refusing company. Many feared she would wither away. Patacārā sat with her day after day, saying little, only breathing beside her, showing her that stillness was possible. At last, the woman asked, "Why do you sit with me? I am broken." Patacārā replied, "So was I. But broken wood can still be fuel for fire. Let your suffering kindle wisdom, not despair." The woman stayed, practiced, and in time found peace. Thus, Patacārā became a beacon not only for her contemporaries but for generations yet to come. The nuns she trained carried her teachings into distant lands, spreading discipline and compassion wherever they went. Her legacy was not written in stone or scrolls, but in the hearts of those she guided. In the evenings, when the Sangha gathered, she often reflected aloud, "I once thought my life was ruined when I lost everything. But now I see without those losses, I would never have come to the Blessed One, never have walked this path, never have taught you. My tears watered the soil of my awakening. Your tears will do the same. Do not curse your sorrow, transform it." The young nuns listened, their eyes shining with reverence, for they knew they were not only being taught rules, they were being shown how to live, how to suffer, how to transform. And in this, Patacārā left her truest mark, not merely as the guardian of Vinaya, but as a mother who guided the next generation with wisdom forged in the fire of her own sorrow. Thus the woman once broken became the builder of strength. The mother who lost her children became the mother of countless daughters in the Dhamma. And the one who had wandered naked in madness now clothed others in the robe of freedom. The years passed quietly in Jetavana and in the other monasteries where the Sangha gathered. The rains came and went, harvests rose and fell, rulers changed, cities grew. Yet through it all, Patacārā remained a steady presence, calm, disciplined, unshaken. She had long since moved beyond her own grief. Now her life was entirely dedicated to guiding others. And with each novice she trained, with each grieving mother she comforted, with each word she spoke in the Dhamma, she laid the foundation of a legacy that would outlive her body. This was legacy of compassion. Her presence became woven into the very fabric of the Bhikkhuni Sangha. Younger nuns looked to her as a pillar, not only for her precision in Vinaya, but for the warmth that radiated from her compassion. She never allowed laxity. She was strict in discipline, but her strictness was never cruel. It was the strictness of love, like a mother guiding a child away from harm. She taught them to respect the robe, to honor the bowl, to guard the senses, to watch the breath. But more than rules, she taught them resilience. Life will not spare you, she told them often. Storms will come, losses will come, but if you hold to the Dhamma, no storm can destroy you. Stories of her wisdom spread beyond the monastery walls. Villagers repeated her sayings as proverbs. Mothers told their daughters of the nun who had lost everything yet found peace. Pilgrims who came to see the Buddha often returned home speaking not only of the Blessed One, but also of Patacārā, the woman who turned her sorrow into a lantern for others. The Buddha himself frequently held her up as an example. He praised her as the foremost among his female disciples in knowledge and mastery of discipline. He pointed to her story when lay followers doubted whether women could attain the same liberation as men. "See Patacārā," he would say. "She has walked the path from madness to arahantship. She guides her sisters with wisdom and strength. In her, the power of the Dhamma is clear." Her name entered the verses of the Therigatha, the songs of the elder nuns. There, her own words were preserved. Laments of loss turned into hymns of awakening. In those verses, she spoke not of despair but of freedom, declaring that she had seen the body as fragile, the world as impermanent, the self as empty. Her poems became a guide for future generations, proof that even the deepest wounds could flower into insight. One of her verses declared, "I have washed my feet, and with the water poured away, I watched the drops fall. So too do all formations fall away. Thus my heart is freed." Simple, clear, and profound, these lines captured the essence of her realization. They became a teaching chanted by countless nuns, reminding them that even ordinary acts could reveal impermanence if seen with wisdom. Her compassion was not limited to women alone. Men too sought her counsel. Farmers grieving lost harvests, merchants ruined by misfortune, fathers mourning children, they all found solace in her presence. She did not speak at length, nor with ornament. She spoke simply, directly, as one who had walked the road herself. "All that arises passes away," she would say. "Do not cling. Let go. In letting go, you will be free." Her words, though plain, carried the authority of lived truth. As age touched her body, her hair graying, her steps slowing, her eyes never dimmed, younger nuns took her arm to steady her, but she often laughed gently. "This too is impermanent," she would remind them, pointing to her own aging frame. "Do not grieve for youth, it passes for all. Use your time wisely." Even her decline became a teaching. When she finally passed, it is said the Sangha wept not with the wild grief of clinging, but with gratitude. They wept as one weeps when a great tree, long a source of shade and shelter, at last falls to the earth. They remembered her not as the madwoman she once was, but as the elder, the Theri, the mother of discipline, the teacher of compassion. Her legacy lived on in many ways. In the nuns she trained, who carried her teachings into new monasteries. In the verses she left, sung for centuries as reminders of impermanence. In the memory of her transformation, which inspired lay followers to turn their grief into practice. And in the recognition preserved in the texts, that she was among the greatest of the Buddha's female disciples, foremost in discipline, radiant in wisdom, unmatched in compassion. For generations to come, her story would be told. The story of a woman who lost everything: husband, children, parents, home, even her sanity, yet who rose from the ashes of despair to become a teacher of freedom. The story of one whose tears once matched the oceans, yet whose clarity now outshone the stars. Thus, Patacāra's legacy was not sorrow, but compassion; not despair, but discipline; not madness, but wisdom. She showed that no life was too broken to be healed, no grief too deep to be transformed, no storm too fierce to be weathered. Her life became a living testament to the power of the Dharma, a beacon for all who seek freedom from suffering. The world remembered her not as a woman of tears, but as a woman of truth. And in the silence of meditation halls, in the chanting of verses, in the calm eyes of those who practice discipline with compassion, her legacy continues to live. Centuries have passed since Patacārā walked the dusty roads of Savatthi, since she wept upon the ruins of her home, since she bowed at the feet of the Buddha and began her long journey from madness to liberation. The palaces of kings have crumbled, empires have risen and fallen, yet her story endures. And though the world has changed beyond recognition, though our streets are filled with machines instead of ox carts, though our homes glow with screens instead of oil lamps, the truth she discovered remains the same. This is Lessons for Our Time. In Patacārā we see the rawest edges of human pain. She lost her husband, her children, her parents, her home. She lost her very sanity. Few among us today will face tragedy so concentrated, so merciless. Yet in her grief we recognize something of our own. For who among us has not lost? Who among us has not clung to what slipped away? Who has not cried into the night, asking why the world can be so cruel? Her story tells us that suffering is not a punishment, not a curse aimed at us alone. It is the fabric of human life. Her tears, the Buddha said, were greater than the waters of the oceans, and so are ours, across lifetimes. The first lesson for us, then, is universality. Your pain is not yours alone. When you grieve, you are not isolated. You are sharing in the common fate of all beings. And in that recognition, there is a strange comfort. You are not singled out. You are not abandoned. You are human. And to be human is to know loss. But Patacāra's story does not stop with recognition. She did not remain crushed by grief. She transformed it. The second lesson for us is transformation. Pain can destroy, but it can also teach. Tears can drown, but they can also cleanse. Every moment of loss contains within it the seed of wisdom, if we are willing to look closely. When Patacārā faced the storm of her memories in meditation, she discovered that even her most painful images obeyed the same law. They arose, they lingered, they passed away. And in that simple truth, impermanence, she found release. How often in our own lives do we resist this truth? We clutch at our jobs, our relationships, our possessions, as if they will last forever. We believe our youth will not fade, our health will not fail, our loved ones will not leave, and when they do as they must, we feel betrayed. But Patacārā shows us, the betrayal is not in impermanence, the betrayal is in our refusal to see it. When we embrace impermanence, we are no longer victims of change, we are students of it. The third lesson is compassion. Out of her suffering, Patacārā did not turn bitter. She did not curse the world or retreat into silence. Instead, she became a teacher, a guide, a mother to the Sangha. She took the very wounds that had nearly destroyed her and offered them as medicine to others. In this, she teaches us that our pain need not isolate us. It can connect us. The very places where we have been broken can become the places where we touch others most deeply. Your grief, your loss, your hardship, they are not meaningless if they allow you to extend compassion to someone else who suffers. In a world like ours, filled with anxiety, loss, and constant change, Patacāra's life feels uncannily relevant. We live in a time of uncertainty. Illnesses strike suddenly, economies collapse, relationships fracture, climate shifts. Our security is fragile, and many feel the same despair Patacārā once felt, that the ground beneath their feet has dissolved. Her story whispers across the centuries, "You are not alone. This is the nature of life." But it need not destroy you. It can awaken you. Think of the ocean of tears the Buddha spoke of. If your tears today feel endless, remember they are part of that ocean. But also remember, Patacārā crossed that ocean. So can you. Through mindfulness, through acceptance, through compassion, the same path is open. You do not need to be crushed by impermanence. You can be freed by it. Perhaps the greatest lesson Patacārā offers is hope. Not shallow hope that everything will always go your way, not false hope that you can escape change, but deeper hope that even in the darkest night, a dawn is possible, that madness can turn into wisdom, that despair can turn into compassion, that oceans of tears can become oceans of peace. When you sit quietly and watch your breath, remember Patacārā. When sorrow rises in your chest, when memories tear at your heart, remember her sitting beneath the trees, watching her grief rise and pass like waves. When you feel you cannot go on, remember that she too once thought her suffering would destroy her, and yet she walked the path to freedom. Her life is not a story locked in the past. It is a mirror for our present, a guide for our future. It reminds us that no matter how shattered we feel, the Dhamma can gather the pieces. No matter how lost we are, the path can be found beneath our feet. No matter how heavy our tears, they can become the very water that nourishes awakening. Thus, the lesson of Patacārā is not only about sorrow, but about possibility. Not only about loss, but about transformation. Not only about impermanence, but about liberation. Her story lives because it speaks to what is deepest in us, the part of us that suffers, and the part of us that longs to be free. The story of Patacārā may seem rooted in an ancient world of rivers and storms, of hawks and snakes, of dusty roads and city gates. Yet if we look closely, we find her life reflected all around us today. For though the details have changed, the essence of human suffering has not. The forces that tore her life apart, impermanence, loss, change, are the same forces that shape our own. This is modern echoes of impermanence. Consider the river that swept away her son. To us, it may not be a river's current, but an illness that strikes suddenly, a diagnosis delivered in a sterile hospital room, a life pulled under by forces we cannot control. We stand at the edge, just as Patacārā did, reaching helplessly as someone we love is carried beyond our grasp. The grief is the same, the helplessness the same, the truth the same. Life is fragile, and we are not its masters. Consider the hawk that seized her infant. Today, it may not be a bird in the sky, but the relentless accidents of modern life, a car crash on a crowded highway, a moment's distraction that changes everything, a tragedy that arrives swift and merciless. One moment, joy rests in our arms. The next, it is snatched away. The cry that tore from Patacāra's throat is the same cry that echoes in emergency rooms and darkened bedrooms today. Impermanence does not need wings. It finds countless ways to take what we cling to. Consider the snake that killed her husband. In our age, it may be a sudden heart attack, a pandemic sweeping through cities, or violence that strikes without warning. A life partner gone in an instant, leaving us trembling, wondering how the world can continue while our world has collapsed. Patacāra's scream is not confined to the fields of ancient India. It is heard in the mourning wails of widows and widowers across every nation, every century. And the storm that crushed her family home, what is it but the disasters we know too well today? Hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, wildfires, families buried in rubble, photographs floating in the water, lives turned to ashes overnight. The impermanence that shattered Patacāra's mansion in Savatthi is the same impermanence that uproots entire communities in our time. We like to think our age is different, that with technology and wealth we are safe from the raw cruelty of life. Yet the truth whispers beneath the surface. We are as vulnerable as ever. A phone call in the night, a test result in the mail, a headline on the news, our illusions crumble, and we find ourselves standing where Patacāra once stood, bewildered, broken, asking why. But her story does not end in despair, and neither must ours. The Buddha's teaching to her that the tears we shed are greater than the waters of the four oceans is as piercingly relevant now as it was then. For what are our global headlines but daily reminders of this truth? Wars displacing millions, parents burying children, families torn apart. Our oceans of tears continue to swell. Yet Patacāra shows us that we are not alone in this ocean. Our grief is shared, and in that sharedness lies the beginning of compassion. In our modern world, we often seek to avoid suffering. We numb it with distractions, scrolling endlessly through glowing screens, drowning it in consumption, covering it with constant busyness. But avoidance does not heal. Patacāra tried to run too, fleeing the river, fleeing the storm, yet peace came only when she stopped, when she sat beneath the trees and faced her sorrow directly. Her courage becomes a mirror for us. The lesson is timeless. Do not run. Sit, breathe, watch. Let the grief teach. Her story also echoes in the mental struggles that haunt our age. Depression, anxiety, breakdowns. Are they not our own forms of madness? Patacāra tore her clothes and wandered raving through the streets. Today, many of us wander inwardly, consumed by pain no one can see. And just as people once mocked her, society today often stigmatizes those who break beneath suffering. Yet the Buddha saw her not as mad, but as human, as a seeker, as one who could awaken. In this, we are reminded, our deepest wounds do not disqualify us from healing. They may in fact be the very ground from which awakening grows. We also find her story reflected in our restless grasping. She clung to husband, children, parents believing they would remain. We cling to careers, possessions, status, identities. We measure our worth by the fragile things we hold, and when they slip away as they always do, we collapse. Patacāra's insight is the same one we must face. Clinging is the root of suffering. Freedom is not in holding tighter, but in letting go. Yet perhaps the greatest modern echo of Patacāra's story is hope. For if someone who lost everything, family, sanity, dignity, could rise and find liberation, then no one is beyond hope. Our suffering may feel singular, unbearable, permanent, but her life testifies otherwise. She reminds us that suffering is not the end of the story. It can be the beginning. When you lose someone you love, remember Patacāra. When illness strikes, when disaster takes, when the future collapses, remember her. Not because her pain lessens yours, but because her transformation shows what is possible. She wept oceans of tears, yet found the ocean of peace. She was broken utterly, yet became whole in wisdom. Her past did not define her future, and neither must yours. Thus, the echoes of Patacāra resound in every age. Her river is our hospital ward, her hawk is our accident, her snake is our sudden loss, her storm is our disaster, and her awakening is our possibility. In her story, the ancient and the modern meet, and in her legacy we see that impermanence is not an enemy to fight, but a truth to understand. For once we see it clearly, sorrow no longer crushes us. It becomes our teacher, our guide, our path to freedom. Patacāra's life is remembered not only because of her tragedy, but because of her transformation. She discovered that no loss, no grief, no madness is beyond the reach of the Dhamma. And at the very heart of her healing was a simple yet profound practice: mindfulness. For mindfulness was the thread that stitched together the fragments of her shattered life. It was the lamp that lit her way out of despair, and it is this same practice that can heal us today. This is healing through mindfulness. When Patacāra sat beneath the sala trees, she did not escape her sorrow by forgetting. She did not bury her grief or pretend it was gone. Instead, she turned toward it, breath by breath. She learned to sit with her pain, to watch it arise, to let it pass. She discovered that even the fiercest storm loses its strength when observed with a steady mind. This is mindfulness, not escape, not suppression, but presence. How can we centuries later apply her lesson? Begin where she began, with the breath. Even now, as you listen, pause. Notice your inhale, notice your exhale, rising, falling. Coolness as air enters, warmth as air leaves. Nothing else is required. Already, you are practicing what saved Patacāra. When she faced the memory of her son swept away by the river, she did not run, she breathed. When the image of the hawk tore at her, she breathed. When her parents' bodies burned, she breathed. This was her courage, to remain present, to breathe in the midst of sorrow, and this is our invitation. When grief rises in your chest, when anxiety tightens your stomach, when memories stab at your mind, pause, breathe, let mindfulness hold you. Mindfulness does not erase pain, but it changes our relationship to it. Imagine holding a burning coal tightly. It sears, it consumes. Now imagine placing that same coal on the ground and observing it. The heat is still there, but you are no longer burned. So it was for Patacāra. Her memories still came, but by observing them rather than clinging, she was freed. Our thoughts, our worries, our losses are no different. When we watch them with awareness, they lose their power to consume us. We can also follow her in walking. She once clung to great dreams, to family and wealth, only to see them destroyed. But in the monastery she learned to place one foot before the other with mindfulness, lifting, placing, touching the earth. She discovered that life is not carried in vast ambitions, but in small, steady steps. Try this yourself. When you walk across a room or down a street, feel your foot lift, move, and settle. With each step, remind yourself, this is enough. This moment is enough. Patacārā also practiced mindfulness in sorrow itself. When grief came, she did not push it away. She named it pain, grief, memory. She watched it, and she saw it change. This is something we, too, can do. When sadness arises, whisper to yourself, sadness. When anger arises, anger. When fear arises, fear. In naming, you create space between yourself and the emotion. You recognize, this is not me, not mine, not myself. It is a passing event, like a cloud across the sky. In our modern lives, mindfulness can be woven into the simplest acts. Washing your hands, feel the cool water, notice the touch. Eating a meal, taste each bite. See how the flavor arises and fades. Listening to someone, really listen, without drifting into your own thoughts. Each act becomes a practice. Each act becomes healing. Patacāra's greatest realization was impermanence. She saw that her husband, her children, her parents, all had passed, and she saw that her grief, too, passed. This is the heart of mindfulness, to see impermanence directly. When you watch your breath, you see it arise and vanish. When you watch your thoughts, you see them come and go. And in this seeing, you loosen your grip. You begin to understand nothing can be held, yet nothing needs to be held. Peace is not in keeping, but in letting go. Today, many of us live in constant rush, surrounded by noise, flooded by information. Our minds scatter, our hearts grow restless. We search endlessly for comfort, for distraction, for escape. But Patacāra's lesson is timeless. Sit down, breathe, watch. Within that simple act lies a freedom greater than any distraction can offer. Try it now. Sit as you are. Place your hands gently in your lap. Close your eyes if you wish. Notice the breath entering and leaving. Notice the thoughts that arise. Do not chase them. Do not fight them. Let them come. Let them go. Whisper to yourself, this too shall pass, for it always does. This was the truth Patacārā lived, and it is the truth still available to us. In time, mindfulness transforms not only how we handle pain, but how we live each day. We become less hurried, more present, more compassionate. We listen more deeply, speak more gently, walk more carefully. And when loss inevitably comes, as it always does, we do not collapse. We grieve, but we do not drown. We weep, but we do not despair. We remember Patacārā, the woman who wept oceans of tears, yet found freedom in a single breath. Thus, her gift to us is not only her story, but her practice. A story alone can inspire, but a practice can transform. If we honor her, let it be by living as she lived, mindful, compassionate, free. Patacāra's life began as the story of one woman born into privilege, bound by love, shattered by loss. But in the centuries that followed, her life has become more than a single story. She is remembered not only as a disciple of the Buddha, not only as a nun of discipline, not only as one who reached arahantship. She is remembered as something larger, something timeless. She is remembered as a universal mother. For who is a mother? It is not only the one who bears children, but the one who nurtures, who protects, who comforts. Patacārā bore 2 sons, and both were taken from her. She grieved as only a mother can grieve, but when her sorrow was transformed, her motherhood was reborn. She became mother to countless seekers, novices trembling with fear, widows weighed with grief, strangers who came to her broken and left consoled. Her womb was emptied by impermanence, but her heart became boundless, embracing all who suffered. In her we see the paradox of the Dhamma, that in losing everything, she gained the capacity to give endlessly. She could sit with the grieving because she had grieved. She could steady the fearful because she had known terror. She could comfort the lost because she had once been utterly lost herself. The very wounds that had nearly destroyed her became the channels through which her compassion flowed. The texts remember her as foremost in discipline, but the people remembered her as mother. Mothers whispered her story to daughters. Daughters carried it in their hearts as they grew. Her name entered the verses of the Therigatha, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a hymn of resilience, of love transfigured into wisdom. To this day, her verses are chanted in monasteries, her tears retold not as failure but as triumph. And she belongs not only to the Sangha of her time, she belongs to all who suffer. A grieving parent in a hospital room today can find her there, whispering, "I too have wept as you weep. You are not alone." A refugee crossing dangerous waters can find her there. "I too lost family to the flood, but the flood can be crossed." A woman trapped in grief or despair can find her there. "I too wandered mad with loss, but madness is not the end. Peace is possible." In this way, Patacārā has become universal. She transcends the boundaries of caste and gender, of culture and century. Her story is not locked in India 2,500 years ago. It is alive wherever someone suffers, alive wherever someone transforms pain into wisdom, alive wherever compassion rises from ashes. The Sangha called her Theri, elder nun, but generations after have called her something more, a mother of compassion. For though she bore only 2 sons in life, in spirit she bore countless children, those she guided, those she comforted, those she still inspires today. And perhaps this is the greatest gift she offers us, the assurance that compassion is born from brokenness. Too often we believe that our wounds disqualify us, that our grief makes us weak. Patacārā shows the opposite. It is precisely our brokenness that makes compassion possible. Without loss, we cannot understand loss. Without pain, we cannot sit with another's pain. Without tears, we cannot dry the tears of others. Thus, she is a mother to all who suffer. She does not shield us from impermanence. She knows too well that no one can, but she walks beside us through it. She does not deny our grief. She sat in the depths of her own, but she shows us that grief can ripen into wisdom. She does not promise we will never weep. She wept more than most, but she shows us that even oceans of tears can lead to oceans of peace. Her motherhood is not bound by blood, nor by time, nor by culture. It is the motherhood of compassion, vast as the sky, endless as the sea. So when you think of Patacārā, do not think only of the woman stripped naked by madness, wandering in despair. Think of the elder who gathered young nuns beneath the sala trees, teaching them with both firmness and love. Think of the woman whose verses still sing of impermanence and freedom. Think of the mother who still whispers across centuries, "You are not alone, your suffering can be transformed. Let go, breathe, be free." And in this way, she continues to live not only in scripture, not only in monasteries, but in every heart that dares to turn sorrow into wisdom, in every hand that comforts another, in every moment of mindfulness that transforms pain into peace. Patacārā is not gone. She is here whenever compassion is born. The story of Patacārā is more than the story of one woman. It is the story of all of us. She was born into comfort, like so many who think wealth can protect them. She loved, like all of us do, and clung to that love with every fiber of her being. She suffered unimaginable loss, as we all inevitably must in one form or another. She broke beneath the weight of impermanence, as countless human hearts have broken, and yet she rose. Through the Dhamma, through mindfulness, through discipline and compassion, she was reborn into freedom. This is the great lesson her life leaves us. Suffering is universal, but so is the possibility of awakening. No matter how deep our wounds, they can be healed. No matter how heavy our grief, it can be transformed. No matter how endless our tears, they can water the seeds of wisdom. This is Closing Reflections. As we end this journey together, pause and reflect. What part of Patacāra's story speaks most to you? Is it her desperation, running through storms, screaming for her family? Is it her madness, naked in the streets, rejected and alone? Is it the moment she bowed before the Buddha, hearing that her tears were as vast as the ocean? Or is it the quiet nights when she sat with her breath, slowly turning pain into peace? Perhaps it is all of these, for within her story we find our own reflections. We may not lose children to rivers or hawks, but we lose dreams, health, jobs, relationships. We may not wander in rags through the streets, but we wander inwardly, consumed by anxiety, fear, depression. We may not bury parents in a collapsed mansion, but we bury them in hospitals, in cemeteries, in our hearts. And yet, as with Patacārā, none of these losses has to be the end. They can be the beginning of wisdom. The Buddha's path is not a promise to erase pain. It is a promise that pain can be understood, and through understanding, we can be free. This was Patacāra's gift, and it is ours as well. So take her story with you. Let it whisper to you when you feel alone, "You are not alone." Let it remind you when grief overwhelms, "This too shall pass." Let it encourage you when despair tempts you to give up. Even oceans of tears can lead to oceans of peace. And remember this, compassion is born from brokenness. Just as Patacārā became a universal mother, so too can you be a source of comfort to others. Your suffering, once understood, can become your greatest gift. The very places where you have been wounded can become the places where you touch others most deeply. As we close, let us give gratitude. Gratitude to the Buddha, whose wisdom turned Patacāra's madness into awakening. Gratitude to Patacārā herself, who walked through fire and showed us it can be crossed. And gratitude to you, the listener, for walking this journey with us. May her story not remain words in your ears, but seeds in your heart, growing into the flowers of mindfulness and compassion. And now, from all of us here at Buddhism Verity, thank you for listening. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, your open heart. This channel exists because of seekers like you, those who wish not only to hear the Dhamma, but to live it. If this story has touched you, may it stay with you, guiding your breath, your steps, your choices. This is not the end of our journey together. It is only one chapter. In our next video, we will explore one of the Buddha's most profound discourses, the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the teaching of no self. If Patacāra's story revealed to us the power of impermanence and the possibility of transformation, the Anattalakkhana Sutta will take us deeper into the very heart of the Buddha's wisdom, showing us why no self can be found in body, feeling, perception, formation, or consciousness. It is a teaching that shook the first disciples into awakening, and it may shake us as well. So join us again as we continue to walk together on this path of truth. For now, let us close with the simplest reflection, the one that carried Patacāra from madness to peace. Breathe, inhale, exhale, rising, falling. See it arise, see it pass. Nothing is held, nothing is lost. In this moment, freedom is here. Thank you for being here with Buddhism Verity. May you be well, may you be at peace, may you be free. The story of Patacāra is more than the story of one woman. It is the story of all of us. She was born into comfort, like so many who think wealth can protect them. She loved, like all of us do, and clung to that love with every fiber of her being. She suffered unimaginable loss, as we all inevitably must in one form or another. She broke beneath the weight of impermanence, as countless human hearts have broken, and yet she rose. Through the Dhamma, through mindfulness, through discipline and compassion, she was reborn into freedom. This is the great lesson her life leaves us. Suffering is universal, but so is the possibility of awakening. No matter how deep our wounds, they can be healed. No matter how heavy our grief, it can be transformed. No matter how endless our tears, they can water the seeds of wisdom. This is Closing Reflections. As we end this journey together, pause and reflect. What part of Patacāra's story speaks most to you? Is it her desperation, running through storms, screaming for her family? Is it her madness, naked in the streets, rejected and alone? Is it the moment she bowed before the Buddha, hearing that her tears were as vast as the ocean? Or is it the quiet nights when she sat with her breath, slowly turning pain into peace? Perhaps it is all of these, for within her story we find our own reflections. We may not lose children to rivers or hawks, but we lose dreams, health, jobs, relationships. We may not wander in rags through the streets, but we wander inwardly, consumed by anxiety, fear, depression. We may not bury parents in a collapsed mansion, but we bury them in hospitals, in cemeteries, in our hearts. And yet, as with Patacāra, none of these losses has to be the end. They can be the beginning of wisdom. The Buddha's path is not a promise to erase pain. It is a promise that pain can be understood, and through understanding, we can be free. This was Patacāra's gift, and it is ours as well. So take her story with you. Let it whisper to you when you feel alone. You are not alone. Let it remind you when grief overwhelms, this too shall pass. Let it encourage you when despair tempts you to give up. Even oceans of tears can lead to oceans of peace. And remember this, compassion is born from brokenness. Just as Patacāra became a universal mother, so too can you be a source of comfort to others. Your suffering, once understood, can become your greatest gift. The very places where you have been wounded can become the places where you touch others most deeply. As we close, let us give gratitude. Gratitude to the Buddha, whose wisdom turned Patacāra's madness into awakening. Gratitude to Patacārā herself, who walked through fire and showed us it can be crossed. And gratitude to you, the listener, for walking this journey with us. May her story not remain words in your ears, but seeds in your heart, growing into the flowers of mindfulness and compassion. And now, from all of us here at Buddhism Verity, thank you for listening. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, your open heart. This channel exists because of seekers like you, those who wish not only to hear the Dhamma but to live it. If this story has touched you, may it stay with you, guiding your breath, your steps, your choices. This is not the end of our journey together. It is only one chapter. In our next video, we will explore one of the Buddha's most profound discourses, the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the teaching of no self. If Patacāra's story revealed to us the power of impermanence and the possibility of transformation, the Anattalakkhana Sutta will take us deeper into the very heart of the Buddha's wisdom, showing us why no self can be found in body, feeling, perception, formation, or consciousness. It is a teaching that shook the first disciples into awakening, and it may shake us as well. So join us again as we continue to walk together on this path of truth. For now, let us close with the simplest reflection, the one that carried Patacāra from madness to peace. Breathe, inhale, exhale, rising, falling. See it arise, see it pass. Nothing is held, nothing is lost. In this moment, freedom is here. Thank you for being here with Buddhism Verity. May you be well, may you be at peace, may you be free.